Spear halves hummed when struck just so. He could play them like instruments. In the courtyard inside the shadow of the water garden's pale arches, Oberyn Martell turned the long ash pole through his hands, let its weight carry him into a low sweep, reversed, and cut the air high enough to brush the underside of an orange bough. When he moved in that heat, each breath tasted of salt and fruit and the thin iron of his own sweat. The sea beyond the ochre walls lay as flat as beaten copper, throwing back the morning light in soft sheets. Children's shouts came and went with the sea breeze. He heard their feet on tile, their laughter rising up to the cedar rafters, then fading when they darted away to play at war with palm fronds and shells that shone like moons. He stopped with the spear held crosswise so that his forearms burned and his shoulders trembled, then eased it down to the flagstones. The spear's shadow fell true. His heart slowed in steady intervals. When he let the day begin to trespass on the private rhythm of his practice, he noticed the courier standing at the far arch, half in sun, half in shade. The young man had sand-dusted boots and the fixed, taut expression of one who has run the boneway in haste and felt its narrow ledges at his heels. "You could have coughed," Oberyn said, bringing the haft up to rest against his shoulder with a gentle tap. "The prince said you should not be disturbed," the courier answered quickly, as if caution were a stone he must spit out before it choked him. "But the rider insisted. He gave me this and swore by the seven if I didn't place it in your hand before noon, he would carry it to Old Town and sell my name to the High Tower." "You look like a man who believes threats," Oberyn said, and smiled without softening. He accepted the rolled scrap. Inside the red wax was a crystal blue that looked like river water caught in glass. The seal wasn't any he knew, yet something in the tiny streaks inside the wax, the way light fractured, put winter on his skin. He broke it. "No banner, no signature, only a line written in a plain soldier's hand. Come and see." The message alone was not strange. Men had sent him worse invitations in his life. What caught him was the knot of the ribbon. 2 loops, 1 twist turned inward, the old Dayne knot. It was used and taught at Starfall for tying blunted blades in their cloth covers when carried through halls. He had learned that knot as a boy when he and Elia passed through the halls whose windows faced the river to the sea and the sky was pale and endless above. He had learned it from a patient young knight with hair the color of wheat sheaves in late sun and a voice that never rose in anger and a sword that drank the dawn out of the air. Oberyn laid the parchment flat on the stone bench and read the words again. "Come and see." The hand was not familiar. The ribbon was. The knot was a skin prickle of recognition laid over years of dust. "Where did the rider come from?" he asked. The man said the Red Mountains. The courier had the sense to wait until he was asked. He wore rough brown and carried no blade, only a walking stick. He drank once and left. "Did he give a name?" He said, "No name that matters, my lord." Oberyn turned the ribbon between thumb and forefinger, then tucked it into his sash with the folded scrap. The sea looked nearer than it was. Waking in the night lately, he had felt that same closeness, as if the dark pressed its ear to his chest and listened to old grief moving around his bones. "Find Areo," he said. "Have him ready my mare and a second mount for the desert. Tell no one else. Tell the prince I am going to look at a piece of our past." It was not far as they measured distance in Dorne, yet far enough to turn a man's breath into nettles. Oberyn left the water gardens by the back gate in the company of Areo and a single waterskin carrier who knew the springs and the rocks that looked like springs and were death. They took the green blood north until it thinned to nothing but bright eddies between banks of reed and stone, then left it and climbed into the Red Mountains where the light changed and the sky seemed smaller only because the earth rose up into it. Travel there was a matter of not making foolish choices. Areo said very little, as usual, but pointed with his giraffe-shouldered axe when a path on the right was not a path at all but a goat's overconfidence. The air smelled of thyme and dry chalk and the faint memory of rain. Oberyn's mare picked her way where he asked and drank when he let her. They slept one night under a good overhang and woke with grit in their teeth. The second day, instead of climbing, they went down. The ravine was bare except for one ribbon of darker rock, and the sound of water came from under the skin of the earth. "Here," Oberyn asked. Areo nodded, sank to one knee, pressed his palm to the stone as if a measure of heartbeat lived in it. He found the edge of the hidden seam with his knife and levered a thin slab aside. The smell that rose was green and ghostly and made Oberyn's tongue ache for the taste of it. They watered the horses with a leather ladle and filled skins until they hung heavy, then followed the ravine until it opened on a stony basin where the wind died. The sun reached into that bowl and made everything in it look bleached. Stones, scrub, the hollowed trunk of a dead tree that hadn't seen a leaf in a decade. A man sat on the fallen trunk as if he had been carved out of the same light that scoured the basin. He wore a plain wool cloak the color of soil and had neither sword nor shield in sight. His hands were bare and lean and without rings. He had his hood up and his face down. When Oberyn's mare snorted, he looked up. Arthur Dayne's eyes were not violet like his sister's. You'd call them gray until the light changed and you'd think they remembered a different sky. The years had hollowed his cheeks and put a line between his brows. He had cut his hair short. Scars had not claimed him. The greatest blade in the world had always struck where it must, and the man who carried it had always gotten out of the way. For an instant, the heat fell away and Oberyn felt the cool nights at Starfall again. The balcony with the shadow of palms on the flagstone, Elia asleep with her hair over her cheek and the river talking to the sea in the distance, and Arthur, who had never argued when a foolish younger boy asked for one more pass at him in the yard, even after bruises. He had been good to a boy who did not yet deserve such patience. He had been good to Elia in the way men who love battle can be good when they fear the harm in them and will not let it out near a woman who smiles with the whole of her face. "Come and see," Oberyn said, dismounting and throwing the reins to Areo with a snap of wrist that made the mare stand as if nailed. "I came and here I am. Tell me what it is you want me to look upon." Arthur stood. He did not offer his hand and he did not reach for a blade. Areo knelt and touched 2 fingers to his chest in a soldier's greeting and then drifted to the shade of the stone lip with the waterskin carrier, far enough to let voices fall and break privately, near enough to be back in time if voices turned to something else. "I have watched you in sunlight and in shadow," Arthur said in the unhurried cadence he had always used. He sounded like someone who had spent long days without speaking. "There is no wrong moment to come to the truth. This one will serve." "You speak in riddles," Oberyn said. "It is how old knights hide the holes in them," Arthur said, and the muscle in his cheek twitched. "I am sorry. When I was younger, I believed we made oaths and those oaths made the world. I have walked long enough without my sword to see that men made both oaths and world, and not the other way around." "You came to tell me philosophy," Oberyn said, letting sharpness into his voice to see where it met resistance. "You vanish for years without so much as a whisper and send me a ribbon tied the way old squires tied practice blades and ask me to walk my feet ragged into a basin and listen to you weigh oaths? You might have sent a book. You have the wit to make your own," said Arthur, and those eyes did not move. "I chose not to write because letters can be burned, carried, mistaken, stolen. The only thing that cannot be stolen is breath already spent and words already said. And what words must be said between us?" "Elia," Arthur said. He did not pad the name, did not ease into or away from it. He set it on the stone as if it were a thing he had brought carefully wrapped from a far place. "I failed her." Oberyn took in a breath and felt it snag mid-chest. He looked at the fallen trunk where Arthur had sat and saw in the split with the color of old blood. The heat had doubled. He thought of his sister's hand on his wrist the day she had left Sunspear for King's Landing. Not worried, not wary, simply warm, with the trust of someone who assumed the world would at last be decent, even if it had made a poor start at it. He had been away when news of her death came, and when he had returned, the water gardens had been full of empty rooms. "You wore white," he said. "And white means you were our enemy when the crown wept and lied and burned. That much is true and will always be true. Now, what else do you want to speak into the hot air of this basin?" "I wore white and I kept my king's son safe until the end," Arthur said. "I kept a promise until it was taken from my hands. That story is full of secrets not mine to give. But listen to this part. When the end came, and I stood among men who were not my friends and not my brothers and not my enemies, because we were all just men with our breath ragged and our muscles yelling and the ground under us asking for blood. I felt something I had not felt since I was a page. It was not fear. It was not rage. It was shame. Not for losing. Not for the kill they took from me. Shame because I had spent my life keeping oaths that could only ever be about one person and one house and one kind of power. I kept them well. I was very fine at keeping them. That is not the same as doing right. Oberyn's shadow had turned and lay across Arthur's boots. He shifted until sun reclaimed it. And you have come to me to do right? You have a mind that will not be quiet, Arthur said. You have the gift of anger and the patience to carry it. You live without illusions, and yet you can be moved by pity. I have learned to listen. Where should I go if I want to begin again and not waste what I know? Where but to someone who has spent his life hating the thing I used to stand for, yet has never turned his hatred into petty comfort. I thought you might be the one man who would not soothe himself with my apology. Keep your apology, Oberyn said, and his voice was soft because his throat was tight. You will need your tongue and your breath for other work. Tell me what you mean when you say begin again. Arthur stepped aside so sun found the split trunk and made its sap lines gleam. I have made a little life in the mountains, he said. It is easy to disappear, but each season the small folk tell more stories. Another levy, another lord's feast, and another burned field. Another tithe sent to buy candles for a sept that never gives back the light. I do not think it is a matter of one bad king or one bad hand, or even the worst of them. I think what presses on their backs presses on ours, and we make a kind of machine that eats children and spits out crowns and ruby rings and bones. His mouth turned, not quite a smile and not sorrow either. What would we build if we had the nerve to stop this one? Do not speak to me of crowns, Oberyn said. We will both turn to animals and forget to use words. Arthur inclined his head. Then let us speak of the seven. What do they build with tea? Tithes? How kind have they made the world? You and I have both seen men die with prayers on their lips, while other men with full bellies repeat those prayers in a marble room and sleep through them. If I tell you I want to put my sword where it deserves to be and draw lines around what I will not do, will you tell me where to go? Your sword, Oberyn said. Where is it, then? Leave it rusted under a rock? Sell it for salt pork and a rent place near a spring? That is one way to begin again. It is not the way I expected from you. Arthur turned and reached behind the dead trunk into a hollow. When he pulled the wrapped bundle free, the cloth was not white. It was a dark, old blue that had been many other colors first. He set it carefully on the stone and unknotted the ribbon around it. The ribbon was gray, and tied two loops, one twist turned inward. Oberyn had seen dawn twice held bare. Once at Starfall, where the river shone like quicksilver and his feet were dirty, and he did not yet know what it meant to look at a thing that had belonged to the first days of the world. Once, when it moved like falling rain through three men in a courtyard in a tower, he only saw later in dreams. Even wrapped, the sword had a gravity to it that made the air feel thin. Arthur's hands hesitated on the last fold. Then he looked at Oberyn instead. Swear, Arthur said. Swear what? That we do not take this out and go to any king's gate when our tempers are hot. Swear that this is not revenge dressed in someone else's language. Swear that if I find I have no courage for this, because I have failed before, you will put your spear through my foot and remind me what pain is for. The laugh that broke from Oberyn was not gentle. You were always the strange one, he said. Very well, I swear. If you break faith with the work we begin, I will break something you value and we will see if you mend. And you will swear back. Arthur's eyes did that light change, not quite gray, not quite violet, some old sea in them. I swear to use this sword for what our words agree upon, and not for less. He unwrapped the last of the cloth. Dawn lay across the dead wood like moonlight poured and then caught. The blade's pale length took color from nothing around it. It made its own very quiet light. Arthur did not lift it yet. He looked down at it, then up. Oberyn Martell, will you help me free our home from the crown and the faith? Both? The words had never sounded in Oberyn's head in that clear an order. Free. He had used the word often, mostly as a knife in his mouth for men who treated freedom as a privilege they doled out to those who already had enough. He had meant revenge sometimes. He had meant an afternoon in a bed where nobody wore a mask. He had meant the right to speak a thought without being told it was an offense to the ears of gods or men. Free our home, from the crown and the faith, both. I will, he said, and a heat that wasn't the sun moved down his arms. We will need a charter. Arthur blinked. A parchment. A language, Oberyn said. Not the language of banners and oaths. Something anyone can carry and remember. A cart can be burned and a house can be leveled and a lord can be very brave at killing. But words that everyone can speak are hard to stamp out. I do not want to fight only to put a different ring on the same finger. If we are very lucky, we will fail often and learn why. If we are more than lucky, we will teach the small folk and the fishers and the washerwomen and the bakers how to use those words as weapons when we are bones. Arthur set his fingers on the hilt of dawn, and Oberyn's vision gave a small swim that felt like a memory too strong for the body. The hilt was black, not with paint but with the dense color of meteors. The blade looked like a long drink of clear, brilliant water. Arthur lifted it and the weight was in the air. He held it low, with a care that told Oberyn he loved it as a farmer loved his work axe and not the way a boy loved a showpiece. Then the first words should be a refusal, Arthur said. We must refuse to put anyone back in iron after we pull them from iron. That includes ourselves. Good, Oberyn said. Listen, I will put the outline. You will put the spine. We will be our own scribes and our own judges of sense. He dropped to a crouch and drew in the dust with the butt of his spear. First, every tithe given under oath to any sept is broken. If there is surplus, it feeds children first. After children, the sick. After the sick, the old. If there is still surplus, it buys skill and seed. Any sept that resists feeds none of its priests until it feeds those who are hungry around its door. Arthur watched, expression smoothed into thought. Second, he said, any man who takes the field under a lord's banner cannot be compelled by law or zeal to fight for the faith, even if the Lord does. The faith does not own their swords, nor their hands. Third, Oberyn added, we carve a passage in our charter for those who have taken vows. If a vow is used to strike them or bind them to harm, they may break that vow without shame. The vow that preserves life outranks the vow that preserves order. Arthur drew a line and another, turning the dust sketch into a map of ideas with places and ways between them. Fourth, he said after a moment, no boy is to be forced into a sept or a squire's harness. No girl is to be... He stopped. You know what I mean. I know, Oberyn said. His jaw hurt and he realized he was smiling without kindness. Fifth, we give the small folk courts where their word is not weighed on a scale against coin. They must be able to judge lords when lords take more than someone can stand. We will need judges who will not take bribes, Arthur said. We will need men and women who believe in sleep. He looked down at his own boots, dust-coated, very ordinary. I dreamed of the seven for a long time. It was easier than dreaming of what I did. Then I stopped. When I began again, the dreams were of a river whose current you cannot see until it moves children away from you and you run and cannot catch them. No face in the dream, just water. I took that to mean I should go where water is used unfairly, where it is held behind a gate and sold for favors. There is such a place near the Vaith. A petty lord with a red kite on his shield keeps a chain across the spring that feeds a village. His brother is a septon. Oberyn had put the dust lines into the shape of a loop. Then we begin there, not with a king, not with a great house that can throw its banners into the sky and turn the ground to paste if it is stepped on too hard. A chain across a spring, a village that will see which side we stand on. If they name us outlaws, we will carry the outlaw's joy for a time. That is not a tragedy. Areo will say this is folly, Arthur said. Areo will say nothing until it is time to strike or to leave, Oberyn said, and raised his voice without looking. What do you say, my friend? Areo's voice came back, the sound of gravel and a baked road. I say there is always a chain and someone who puts it there and someone who takes it away. It is the same work in different clothes. Then the scale tips, Oberyn said and stood. He retied the ribbon around the blue cloth that had wrapped the sword, and something in the knot felt like pulling a door shut without locking it. We will need a name for our work. It is nonsense otherwise, and I like nonsense put to use. Dawn and dusk, Arthur said. Then he shook his head. No, that is too fine. Something that a baker's boy will say without laughing. The Charterers. Dull and honest, Oberyn said, admiring the ugliness of it. Perhaps the dullest names are best. They travel without being caught. They sleep in any bed. We will let it live a while and see how it grows. They rode the long, slow path down to the Vaith together, Areo 2 lengths ahead because his place had always been the space that touched danger first. They stopped to share dates under the shag of a wild fig at midday and watched a hawk hunt heat shimmer. Oberyn spoke of Elia to Arthur for the first time since she died. He did not tell the story as if the world owed him an echo. He spoke of small things. A crease that always showed up early in her shoes because she walked with her toes slightly turned. The way she could taste the difference between two vintages of Dornish red 10 years apart and find kindness for the lesser. The way she bent her head to hear what someone had not yet said. Arthur listened without seeming to move, and Oberyn realized as he spoke that he was telling memories to measure whether the man beside him could bear them. He could. He bore them like a pack he had always carried. You were never the one to sit with a cup, Oberyn said finally. You were the one who stood, as if chairs were for men who could not leave quickly. I do not see you now with your sword across your knees in sunlight. If we do this, you will have to sit and listen often. Will you bear that? If it is my work, I will learn it, Arthur said. I will not like it. Liking is not the same as finding a path you can endure. They came to the spring at evening. The Kite Lord's brother had carved 7 stars above the low stone arch and painted them with crush of berries and chalk and gold dust. The colors had run in old rain and turned to streaks that looked like tears and made women press their lips tight when they passed in and men look away and boys throw stones to see if flakes came off and girls hold babies while counting in a whisper to see whether numbers held off thirst. The chain across the spring was rusted but strong, and the key to the lock hung around the Septon's neck. He wore it like a relic. When he slept, he put it under his tongue. When he ate, he laid it against his cup to feel the wine's cold through its metal. When he bathed, which happened at a season's turn and after funerals, he tucked it into wool. The chain links blackened his fingers when he touched them. He told the village that to drink without the faith schedule was to offend the mother and the father both. Oberyn and Arthur did not stride in. They slept a mile away and came at dawn beside the women with clay jugs and the old men with dry mouths and the children who had been taught to go watch the chain and not ask for it. Areo stood where the shadow of the arch fell, his axe in his hand and the blade down, silently a declaration that had no interest in theater. Oberyn had a cloak thrown over his shoulders and his hood up so he looked like any man the sun had roughened. Arthur wore his plain cloak, and the sword he carried was a short common blade no one would look at twice. Dawn lay wrapped and hidden in the false bottom of a water cart borrowed to us from a man whose daughter had been told her pails were not in time with the maiden's favor. The Septon came from the small cell he kept polished with a zeal that did not reach beyond its low lintel. He had a round belly and a fine mouth, a mouth you could imagine had learned to shape words like stones to be thrown at the backs of those who went by. He wore the key. He lifted it to catch the early light and smiled at his own hands tremble, which he would later tell himself was holy awe and not a man's plain desire to keep control. He always touched each link of the chain with the key before his speech to give the iron the sight of the light, because it helped him believe that iron remembered. This is a spring given to us all, he said, and all things given must be ordered, or the gift becomes a burden. We will drink by schedule and keep the proper gratitude. I have the key. No, Arthur said, and stepped into the arch's shadow with his palms open. His voice was not loud. It was the exact size of the place. If a spring is given to all, none owns its flow. The Septon's eyes went to his face as if a bee had landed on his lip. Who are you two? A man who knows chains, Arthur said, and smiled with half his mouth. They are useful in little things. You hitch a stubborn mule. You haul a boat. They are less useful when placed across what feeds people. That is not governance. That is fear in metal. Oberyn stepped up so that Arthur was bracketed by his presence and Arios. The women with jugs had gone very still. One set hers down carefully, as if water could be startled. An old man's dry tongue came out and wet the cracked red seam of his mouth. "I have the key," the Septon repeated, because keys and words did not last long under new air and had to be replenished. He lifted it again in case the son had forgotten what it was. "I have orders. And we brought a charter," Oberyn said, and now he threw the cloak's hood back, because a face is also a kind of key. Women knew him first. The knowledge moved among them like the ripple when someone looses a stone into water. The old man blinked and put his hand back down because he found it lifting by itself. The children had no idea who he was, only that someone had turned the air tight with intention. In plain words, it says we break this chain and no one here is to put it back. "That is banditry," the Septon said, and tried to keep the tremor out of the center of his chest. "That is the work of men who have turned their faces from." "Save your sermons," Arios said mildly. "They clot the throat." "Bring me the lock," Arthur told the Septon. "I will not hurt you. I will not take your key from your body or put a hand on your neck. If you cannot do it, say you cannot do it and we will open it anyway. But if you can give me your consent, we begin together rather than as enemies. That will be better for you." It took a long while for the Septon to hear the shape of those words, not because he lacked sense entirely, but because he had trained himself not to hear when others spoke there in front of him. He had survived by believing the sound he made was the only sound. While he thought, a young woman stepped forward and lifted her daughter and put the child on her hip so the girl could see men and see the chain. That sight would be a piece of her when she was 30 and alone. She would remember it when she decided to keep her son out of a levee despite a lord's call, because she would remember the sound a chain makes when it falls. Women knew how valleys carry sound. "I will not give you my key," the Septon said. He had a vein under one eye that quivered when he was asked to consider other people. "But I will not curse you. I will pray for you and tell the Lord." "That is 3 decisions you made at once," Oberyn said. "You should have had help with the first. You will not get your wish with the second, and the third is the one you must carry and not us. We will be gone and you will still be here when your brother comes." "Your brother," Arthur said to him gently. "Not your god." Arios' axe head rose like a piece of night and came down on the lock. It struck true, and the old iron, made handsome by its own weight, split apart with a sound that made the children squeal, and the old man grip his knees and the Septon shut his eyes the way people do when a thunderclap finds them in the open. Arios struck again, and the chain's end leaped and skittered and then fell. He pulled the heavy length aside like a dead snake. The women stepped forward in a cautious brightness and set down jugs, and the water took their shyness and made it into laughter that came back under the arch and made the place feel bigger than it had in years. Arthur lifted the fallen links in both hands and set them on the stone beside the arch. The Septon stared at them as at a pile of bones he had not expected to see until his own funeral. He put his hand to his chest and felt the key underneath his wool. His fingers moved in slow circles there, as if he might rub away what had just been done and reveal the old arrangement like paint under paint. He could not. "No tithes," Oberyn said. He was not looking at the Septon now, but at the women. "Not until children are fed and sickness is treated and there is seed in the ground." "What if there is no seed?" asked the young woman with the girl on her hip. Her eyes were the dark of olives at harvest, and she looked at Arthur when she asked because he had said please in his offer in a way the others had not. "Then we find some," Arthur said. "We are not a big host," Oberyn said. "We are 3 for a handful. We are not a host at all and will not be soon. But listen, we will make you no promises we cannot keep. We cannot keep from you men who wear banners and carry orders if they come with many blades. We cannot stop a drought. We can stop this." He touched the chain. "We will leave you words to say when anyone orders you to put it back. Say them back to them and see if your mouth does not feel cleaner. It will not give you water. It will give you a spine." He handed the crumpled dust map to the oldest woman present. a long, brittle woman with a red scarf tied in a sailor's knot at her throat. She took it with a look that said she had taken 1,000 such things and burned most of them for warmth. Her eyes ran down the lines anyway. There were not many words. There were only a few, and they were plain. "That," she said quietly, "we can say. Say them together," Arthur said. "Say them when they ask for what you cannot give." When they turned to go, the Septon found his voice. "You will not get far," he said. The prayer tone that made 15 old women nod because it sounded like a soft meal had gone brittle and its edges showed. The way a poor glaze cracks in kiln heat. "The hand will hear. You will be hunted. The crown sleeps with one eye open, and the faith never closes both." "We do not intend to sleep often," Oberyn said, and bowed with just enough courtesy to be insult and call it a lesson. "If you think prayers ma. Kua road. Put them under your feet and walk. See where you end." They left with the sense of the village behind them like a room that had just had a window opened in it. Air moved in their minds. The sound of the chains fall stuck to them like the smell of rosemary after you bruise it. "Small work," Ario said. Once they had ridden half a mile and the road bent and put scrub between them and the spring. "Sharp work," Oberyn said. "If you want to cut a rope, you do not hit it with a maul. You put a small blade through the right fibers. The rope falls apart of its own weight." Arthur walked a long time without comment, his cloak's hem catching burrs, his hands quiet. When they stopped at another spring, less encumbered by piety, he took out the wrapped blue cloth and put it across his knees and did not open it. He set his hand on it the way men set hands on the heads of boys they are trying to teach without breaking. He had brought them a trouble with his presence. News of him would spread. Oberyn had made peace with being many kinds of trouble in a world that adored men who called their trouble usefulness. Arthur's troubles were quiet and had a gravity Oberyn liked and feared. They would draw other masses until orbits emerged. It began like a rumor you think is a joke and then find written on a door. A chain crossed a spring and was removed. A tree that bore bitter almonds and sweetness both was fenced and the fence taken down. A sept that demanded 3 days' work for 1 day's bread was told no by a room full of women who had practiced saying it together and did not allow the septon to meet their eyes one by one and put ash into their shoulders with his gaze. A boy with a new scar took a parchment the color of dirt and taught his brothers to say the words on it as they stacked would sow the sound of wood and the sound of refusal shaped 1 beat and not 2. They went to the green blood and followed it to where it fanned into slow channels. Boatmen came to them with their long poles and their easy balance and their laughter like gulls. One of them, old as riverbanks, took Oberyn and Arthur to a little island in the stream where a woman who read the current like fingers across the palm of a hand lived in a house built of reeds and strung pearls. She had skin like tea with milk and eyes that turned thin when she smiled. She spread their map on her floor, weighed the corners with stones she had gathered because they looked like animals, and nodded slowly when they told her what words they had used. "Words are bones," she said. "You have put meat on them. Be careful you do not put fat. Fat burns fast. Meat will burn, too, but slowly, and it smells like food and draws the hungry." "She is telling us to keep the language clean," Arthur said. "She is telling us to avoid poetry," Oberyn said, and felt his mouth curve. "A difficult demand to make of a Dornishman." "You may keep 1 poem," the woman said and lifted a finger. "But it must be one everyone in a room can remember without closing their eyes. Choose it wisely." "What would you choose?" Arthur asked, genuinely curious. "You cannot praise a fire," she said. "You can only make food on it." Oberyn laughed out loud at that and she smiled at how pleased he was. "I will make a meal of that," he said. "May we ask you to carry words north?" "I will carry anything upstream if I like the way it will look when it floats back," she said. "My boats know the stones in the river. There are other stones I want to watch people trip on." He could not hurry the spread of a thing alive without killing it. Oberyn gave his hands to smaller work where work would feed the larger. He stood under trees with women who wanted to learn how to use long poles against men who could not imagine a woman choosing to strike. He taught them to move their hands quick so pivots came easily. Arthur showed boys with new muscle on their arms how to stand so their weight lived in their feet and did not fly away the first time someone shouted at them. Areo taught no one anything. He watched and stood, and when men came into their work with knives in their fists and curses in their mouths, he turned and placed himself carefully and proprietarily between those mouths and the people learning to carry themselves differently. Word came from Sunspear that Oberyn had been noticed. Doran did not send threats. He sent knives made of thought. He sent Areo's cousins to find them and tell him they were not orders, merely a prince's wishes in a time of extraordinary folly. He sent a letter that never said the word Elia. Oberyn took the letter onto a roof in the heat. Arthur sat cross-legged with his wrapped sword, and the sky broke around his head like light broken through silk. "He says I am letting a wound think for me," Oberyn said slowly, reading Doran's careful, weighty hand. "He is not wrong. Wounds are not the worst minds. They remember what mattered. He is worried for the children. He is worried that I will break an old covenant with our calm and send someone I love to die for my appetite." "And are you doing that?" Arthur asked. "I am hungry," Oberyn said. "That much I know. I have been hungry all my life and found pleasure in it, because hunger showed me where to put my body and when to take it away, and with whom to share a table. I think I am pointing it correctly now. If I am wrong, I will know, and I will stop. He will say that by the time I know, we will not be able to stop because other men will have sharpened knives on our words." "Other men always do," Arthur said. "I cannot help that. All I can do is say my words clearly, so the knives they sharpen do not pretend to be made by me." He looked up and the sunlight put lines on his face that had not been there when he first left the mountains. He was younger and older now. Paradox many men never managed. We must speak to him, but not yet. Let him hear what kind of thing we have begun and weigh it without tea. He weight of your face. He loves you. That makes men hard to tell the truth to. At the end of that week, a boatman with scarred hands and a gentle mouth brought word from the stepstones that sell sails had begun to turn away from King's Landing's coin for want of weight. Moneys sent south had gone missing. The sea striders, new men with old boats and a taste for black sails until they realized black sails were a mark you carried into the world rather than a magic trick, had begun to ply the stretch between the Stormlands and Dorne. They brought news and loaves and thick salted fish and sharp knives and more men who wanted work that did not make their dreams tight with pain. Oberyn crossed to a low island where rock broke the water like a shoulder breaks the surface in a crowd, and found men ready to say charterers with a sneer because they wanted to find the crack in the wall early. "Say it," Oberyn told them, smiling with the kind of warmth that makes men look down to find they are still wearing boots. "Say it wrong. Say it with your lips like you ate a lemon. You will learn to say it when you like the taste of what your hands do." A woman among them, dark-haired and paper-thin, watched him with a refusal to be impressed that felt like breath on his neck. She carried herself as if she had once held a helm in hurry and now had no patience for the slow implosion of men who had not realized where courage is useful. He saw her crack a smile when he missed a step on a gangplank and caught himself with the spear like an old woman grabbing a doorframe. He liked her at once. She would be useful and difficult. Useful and difficult only work in pairs. Arthur, meanwhile, had gone to Old Town without telling him in time to argue. He left a note that said, "I am going where they bless the harvest and burn the field in the same hour. I will come back if I am allowed to, and if I am not, I will find you by tracing the places where chains have fallen." Oberyn read it and had the kind of rage that does not blow through a room and strip it. It sat packed as a stone near his stomach whose gravity altered how everything else fell. He could not run to Old Town. That would be a performance and not what they were doing. He sent one boatman and a girl with a sharp ear whose mother had kept her out of any sept long enough that the girl's respect went first to what she could touch and not to words and towers. He told them to watch the High Tower and the Starry September and the minor septs on the way, and to note which doorways took coin and which took meat. Arthur moved through Old Town like a shadow of his own past. There was not a man in the citadel who would not have recognized him had he walked into their light. He did not. He walked like a poor knight with nothing left but his hands and a slow dignity that made boys stand up straight without knowing why. He put himself in an alley with a broken ledge of stone where a baker's apprentice sat to tie her hair back and watched men with the 7 stenciled on their sleeves carry baskets up the starry September steps. There was a ledger. Of course there was. A woman wrote in it. She had a stoop that looked like a prayer and a small hand that raced what she believed was God's speed. It would have been a great thing to steal that ledger and the hand that wrote in it and carry both down to the river and show them to the boatmen and the women with jugs. It would have made a fine story. It would also have been a vulgar one and ended too tidily. Arthur instead waited until the woman rose to stretch and rub her neck, and he stepped in through the door without a hinge and stood before the men who counted candles and said, "You have put gates around what other men bring to a god who did not ask for gates. I will ask you to write a different list today." Men in such rooms do not often find swords in their faces, and so he gave them none. He gave them his name. He set it down where they could see it. He gave them the story of a chain across a spring and a map with lines on it that were words and not roads. He waited while a young acolyte went white and then flushed and opened his mouth to call the Hightower's men. He looked at him and said quietly, "Please do not." He saw the boy think for the first time in his life that he might be given the chance to refuse to perform his function. The boy closed his mouth slowly and sat down on the edge of a chest with his hands on his knees, and one of those hands trembled. "Here is the language," Arthur said, and he said it as he would recite a prayer he had decided to write himself after years of letting others put their words in his mouth. "No more tithes until the hungry have eaten and water has been shared, and there is work worth doing for those who can do it. No more demanding the sweat of women and calling it gratitude. No more men with silk cords around their waists telling men with rope belts that suffering is holy. If you believe in your God, keep your God, but do not use him as a chain. You are to send coin to 4 villages by sunset today. I will write their names. You will not call the Hightower. He can come find me later if he has time. If you do this and leave off stealing from peasants in the name of a piece of glass in a window, I will leave you in peace. If you do not, I will sit on your steps with my sword, and we will see whether anyone brings you bread while I am there." Men laughed at him because laughter is the last defense before you must do what is right or do what is wrong. He did not raise his voice. He took out a small knife and cut an apple into 8 pieces and ate one slowly and offered the others around as if that were the most ordinary thing in the world. The woman with the ledger watched him with such ferocity of attention that the muscle in her jaw jumped when she swallowed her own spit. They did as he asked, not because he frightened them, though his calm had in it the power to frighten, and not because they respect him. They did it because he had rubbed away the oil on the door and showed them wood, and they had not been asked to look at wood in years. They wanted him to go away wearing that kindness as well as that authority, to be their excuse later. He wrote the village names on a piece of paper and put it in the woman's hand and said, "Have you ever been hungry?" She had the courage to say, "No." He nodded once and left her there with the list and the small knowledge that had been put into her hand the way children put stones into open palms. Here, look, a thing that is true. Outside, a boy sat with a basket of eels and sang quietly, not afraid and not thinking to be afraid because his life had yet to teach him that singing is something men in power disapprove of. Arthur gave him a copper. The boy looked up and said, "You're a knight." "I am a man who has learned to ask for more than I was taught," Arthur said. The boy wrinkled his nose at an eel that had gone still and then relaxed as if in sleep. "He's dead," he told Arthur with a cheerful lack of elegy. "There is that too," Arthur said, and made his way down the street with its old stones. He saw candle smoke turning blue in morning light and thought of all the fat that had burned to make it. He thought of what flame does to meat and what it does to fat, and he smiled because he could, suddenly, without pain. He did not get far. You do not speak what he had spoken in the starry September and not get a kind of attention that is colder than steel. 3 of the Hightower's men came hard after him and found him by the fish market. He turned because he always turned toward trouble, never away, and put his back to a wall with a satchel of onions hanging over his head, the dry skins whispering on his hair. They were no fools. They were not stupid men ordered by their betters to do something stupid. They were trained and serious and wore their swords narrow and long and knew how to move their weight across the cobbles under their feet without giving it away. "We would like the name you gave inside and the one you didn't," the tallest said. Arthur did not feign ignorance. "I am Arthur Dayne." "The other," the tall one said. "The other will not help you," Arthur said. "It is not a name. It is a decision. If you want it, make it yourself." They came with their swords out and their mouths quiet. Arthur told himself he would not draw in a crowd because steel turns crowds into reports and reports have a way of hardening into policy. He stepped in to the tall one and got inside his guard and put his hand on the man's wrist and the other on his elbow and murmured, "You grip like a noble. Drop." And because it came with the weight of absolute expectation, the man did. The sword clanged and scraped, and the crowd's breath came in and then out and turned into noise. Before the second man could cut across his line of sight, Arthur planted his shoulder in the tall one's chest and turned him into a wall and set his knee in his thigh, and the man gave a little gasp that had nothing to do with fear and something to do with an old wound and sat down on the street because his body asked him very politely to do that and he could not refuse it. The third man stayed where he was with his sword, hesitation blowing his balance by an inch. "Tell the High Tower," Arthur said to him, "that I held my hand today because a woman with a ledger listened. Tell him, as a courtesy, that if he comes to me at the Old Quill by sundown, I will give him bread and a piece of my mind together, and he can decide which tastes worse." The innkeeper, an older man with the soft hands of someone who had learned to carry plates while his wife was still young and wanted him to look decent, did not ask for coin. He slid a loaf across and a piece of cheese with a look that said, "If I die for this I will be angry at you, but I will give it to you just the same, because what's the point of a life if I never do the thing that costs?" The High Tower did not come. A man did, neatly dressed, with a seal ring on the smallest finger of his smallest hand, which means he was trusted and had no taste for ornament. He sat down across from Arthur and did not put his hands on the table because he had spent a lifetime keeping them in his lap. He asked no names. He said, "You will return to where you came from. If you stay, you will find that men with your name are not allowed to go about the city asking questions of ledgers." Arthur said, "And if I go, will your ledgers change?" "My ledgers feed men who keep the law," the man said. "If there is no law, your chain falls on more things than a spring." "I will come back soon," Arthur said, and bit the bread and thought of the river woman's words as he chewed. "You cannot praise a fire. Make food on it." He was eating. He would see if this taste lingered. By the time he returned to the Greenblood, Oberyn had gathered a loose string of people like a fisherman who had taken a net and set it where fish wanted to go anyway. He had 2 women with crow's feet near their eyes who did not suffer fools and had perfect pitch for outrage and knew how to use humor as a blade that would cut and not scar. He had a boy who had been thrown from a horse for shifting his weight wrong and now walked with a hitch and had become a genius at teaching other boys to stand steady. He had the thin woman from the boats who looked unimpressed and told him in front of everyone that if he couldn't learn to walk on wet wood without slipping, she would not let him on any more boats because she had seen enough men fall into water and come back with their pride dripping. He had Ario, whose presence kept the men who loved the smell of blood from pretending their pleasure was principle. "You went to Old Town like a ghost and no one killed you," Oberyn said when Arthur stood on the bank with his mud on his boots. "That tells me you behaved. Did they send a clever man to you?" "They sent a careful one. It amounts to the same thing." Arthur set his hand on Oberyn's shoulder briefly, a soldier's pat that makes many things simple. "He asked me to leave. I told him I would. It is not where I want to spend myself. For every ledger, there are 1,000 men whose wives are waiting on benches. The ledgers can wait for their turn." They sat together on a flat rock and watched a thin scum of pollen from upriver swirl into a little whirlpool that had formed where the bank made a small elbow. Oberyn told him what had happened in Old Town after he left. The woman with the ledger had sent coin to 3 villages and a basket of bread to a 4th. The High Tower had denied that any coin had moved. The Faith had said that this was an accounting error and that it would not happen again, and that anyone asking questions about it was interfering with holy operations. A boy had sung in the street about chains falling and had been beaten by a godly man for his enthusiasm. Enough women had shouted this down that the High Tower's men had taken the pious fellow into custody for his own safety. "The city will not change in a week," Arthur said. "The city is not what we are freeing first," Oberyn said. We are easing fingers loose one by one, where they clutch too hard. There is a village near the Prince's Pass where the Lord has put men at the road with a coin box. They say a tax must be paid to pass. Show them your face first." Arthur looked over at him and smiled with a kind of wickedness that lived quiet and unadorned in him, and which Oberyn had always liked best of all his qualities. "You want me to be recognized," he said. "I want your face to do work I cannot do with mine," Oberyn said. "You are a story. Use it." The coin box man was someone else's cousin's friend. He had a yellow beard and had decided, as men will after 2 years of easy shaking down, that the box belonged to him. He said that he collected it for the Lord. He said the Lord did not know him personally but would be grateful if he did. Arthur put his hands on the box and said, "This belongs to the road." The man put his hand on his sword to show he meant to go as far as necessary to protect what he thought belonged to him. Ario set his axe at the man's feet, and the man blinked at it and at the space where he imagined his toes might be if he took one step forward. "This is not worth dying for," Oberyn told him, "and no one is cutting off your hand. But you are done with this work now. Take yourself home and find your fields again. Tell the Lord you could not face Arthur Dayne with a neat conscience. If you need to use a name as a shield, he will understand. If he wants what is in the box, he can come himself." The man snorted, but not because he had no fear. It was the snort of a person who had been told that something he had held for a year was never his to begin with. He left. The box opened easily. Inside lay coin and a snake's skin, molted and curled atop the silver like a little testament. Oberyn picked the skin out and let it stretch across his knuckles and smiled because it was a joke and a lament both. He put the money on a cloth and counted it with the women who handled their village's coins. Each coin made a small clink that sounded like part of a larger rhythm: water, whined through dry grass, the scuff of a shoe on a threshold. It was then that word began to run ahead of them and throw its shadow on their faces as they approached, and those shadows carried names. Charterers, they said first, because the word was ugly and serviceable and easy, and then because people must romance what they love, the dawners and the sun-drinkers, the contract men, the unshenners. Oberyn liked the ugly one best. He said it with satisfaction and not a trace of grace. It sounded like carpentry, not poetry. Arthur did not say any of them often. He said names when he had to and otherwise spoke as a man who knows he is standing under a sky full of someone else's old words. The crown noticed. The faith noticed earlier and could not agree on how to wring this out of the river. The High Septon in King's Landing sent a letter to Old Town asking for clarity in doctrine regarding certain rural insubordinations, and the Starry September sent back 3 pages of leading questions. The Hand heard about a chain falling and a coin box opened and a rumor that Arthur Dayne, no longer safely dead in a song but inconveniently present, which is the only thing men with power truly fear, was walking around the south with a Dornish prince who laughed when men said, "Your Grace," to anyone. He asked Ser Barristan to look into it. Barristan Selmy came south and did not bring a host. He walked into a village and sat on a log and watched women walk back and forth, pails on their heads, strong and patient and seeing him without letting it slow their work. He asked them for bread, and they gave him a heel and a bowl of stew because he was a man and men must be fed or they do something silly with their hands. He watched a boy run with a stick and trip and get up and hold the stick as if it had betrayed him. He sat very still and took his helmet off and set it down with reverence. He did not send word ahead that he wanted Arthur Dayne. He needed to see the work before he saw the man. Oberyn saw him because it is very difficult to hide a knight of such reputation when he sits like a stone in a stream. Water moves differently around him. He went to him with a spear and a skin of wine and no smile, though his eyes could not help their amusement. Barristan looked up and the years fell away from both their faces for a moment without their consent. They had known each other in the way men who plan other men's deed. HS do, at tables with maps, in halls with banners. They had measured each other's quiet once. "Oberyn," Barristan said. "Ser Barristan," Oberyn said. "You did not bring a songmaker." "I hate songs," Barristan said mildly, and the old lines around his mouth made sense of themselves. "I have come for truth. The Hand asked me to look and to listen. He did not tell me what my ears should find." "That is new," Oberyn said. A king not telling his ears what they must hear. The king cares more for hunting than for policy, Barristan said. And he carries his waist where he goes. The hand bears the heaviness. He is tired. He would like to go home. He will not, because he cannot be sure the city won't simply be eaten. You met a woman who sent coin, Arthur said, and stepped into sight because a man like Barristan, of all men, deserved the decency of not being surprised from behind. You met a box with money in it and a chain on a spring. Barristan looked up at him and for a moment did not breathe. He did not reach for his sword. His eyes changed and something in him loosened that had been tied for a long while. Arthur, he said, and there was a relief in it that made boys with no memory of the Mad King feel a warmth they could not name. I have not spoken your name in a decade. Speak it now and see if we die, Arthur said. Barristan sat with his hands on his knees and looked at the ground between them as if it were a third person listening. I could take you north and end this on the road, he said quietly. The risk you are putting my king to is not small. And if we go north, will your ledgers change? Arthur said, and Barristan's head came up with the exact same look the Hightower's careful man had worn when he saw that the argument was not the one he wanted to have, because the other one asked him to think about beds and food and children rather than crowns and fine talk. What do you want? Barristan asked. To stop pretending that a throne is a sacrament and accept a promise, Oberyn said. To put our hands where they will do the most good and leave the least mark. We will not kneel. We will not be blessed. We will not be quiet. Do you want to make enemies of us? It will be tedious. You have always enjoyed being tedious when it suited you, Barristan said, and a smile went across his face and departed because he would not give it to them as a gift. I will tell the hand the truth, that men with nothing have found a way to say no that does not require a sword at first, and that other men in fine rooms are frightened of that in a way that they cannot articulate yet. He will say that we cannot let this spread. It is already spreading, Arthur said very gently. They sat for a while and let the river talk. Barristan told them a story about a boy with his first lance who had dropped it because his hands sweated and never got his grip again, and how that boy had gone on to be a decent knight because he learned to live with the shame of that drop and not to cover it with bluster. He did not say the boy's name, and they did not ask, because there is mercy in not turning all stories into ledger entries. I will give you time, Barristan said, standing. He was not tall, but his presence changed how a space felt. Not because I think you are right, though you may be, he added with a soldier's bluntness, but because I know wrong and you are not it. When he left, the village had a long moment of feeling like a cup that still held water after a storm passes and the hand holding it finds that grip again. Arthur blew out a breath he had been holding. Oberyn, who never looked like a man holding his breath, flexed his fingers as if they had been asleep. If we fight him, Oberyn said, we will not choose the ground. He may die, and I would hate to be the man to teach the world that good things can be killed by accident. We will not fight him, Arthur said. He will return north and say what he said. He will be called soft. He will be called old. He will be told that he does not understand the shape of power now. He will endure that and hold a line until he cannot. We must be ready to carry what he cannot. They went to a fishing village that had been paying a priest for the right to set nets early because the priest said it angered the mother when fish were pulled from water before the 6th hour of day. They set nets before dawn and gave the first 100 fish to the old and the sick, and the priest arrived with his slippers wet from the dew on the grass and demanded his share. Oberyn told him he could have 2 fish or 2 teeth, and the priest, a practical man, took the fish. He left and came back with 6 men. Areo set his axe in the sand, and they did not cross the line his shadow made. Arthur sat with an old woman and taught her grandson to tie a knot that wouldn't slip when the boat knocked against the dock in an east wind. The boy licked his lips because he wanted to impress the knight and managed it on the 4th attempt. Arthur praised him exactly as much as was useful and not more. At night, when they lay on their backs and let the stars find their eyes, Oberyn said, "This is the part one am almost too patient for." "The slow," Arthur said. "The part where we teach 100 people to use 100 words better and hope 1,000 more are listening," Oberyn said. I am built for speed and laughter and the dirty joy of a fight well chosen. This invites me to be good longer than is comfortable. If you see me beginning to perform, throw something at my head." Arthur turned his face so that his profile made a dark line against the sky. "I will throw my silence at you. You always knew when I refused to clap." They had their first loss not long after. It was not a grand loss. It did not arrive with banners and trumpets. A second village near the Prince's Pass, encouraged by the first, removed a tax and refused a tithe. The Lord did not come himself. He sent men in livery who had not eaten well for a season and wanted the taste of meat slick with fat in their mouths. They took it from other mouths because that is how need trains cruelty. The village stood and said the charter together. The men hit them in the mouths when they spoke. A woman went down with blood in her teeth and got up and said the words again and was put down a second time. The men set a house on fire because a house will burn, and then you can say you meant something else when you lit it. And the women rushed to pull buckets, and the men took their money while their backs were turned. Arthur arrived too late because he had taught a boy to tie and not one village away and had praised him, and praise takes time. He hated that they would be measured by this. He hated that the Lord who sent the men would say to himself that he had put the fear of order into disorder. He hated that the charter had stood and been struck, and that some part of him had assumed that saying words out loud would work magic. He went into the burned house and stood with the ruined smell in his lungs and leaned a hand against a beam that was still hot and thought of all the men he had killed to put someone else on a throne because he had been taught to replace the world instead of mend it. Oberyn stood outside and spoke to the woman with blood on her teeth. He did not say, "I am sorry," because he had said those words into too many beds and over too many bodies and learned that they were an absolute debt no one could pay back. He said, "We will not leave you," because that was the only sentence that did not pretend to carry what it could not. The woman nodded, not forgiving him and not needing to. She had the charter's words in her mouth, and her mouth tasted iron. "We will teach you how to knock a man hard enough he forgets he is holding a purse," Oberyn said. "You will like that." When he went into the ruin and found Arthur with his hand on the beam, he said nothing and stood beside him. They stood until the heat leaked out of the wood and their palms were filmed black. Arthur turned his hand over and studied the stain. "We are not a host and we must not become one," he said, more to the beam than to Oberyn. "But we must teach them to resist with their bodies as well as their mouths." "Yes," Oberyn said softly. "I was always going to get to the part where I hit people. I was trying to be good first." "Do both," Arthur said, "and grieve when grief tells you the truth." That night, a young man who had laughed when the charter was read and then run when the men came, run because he had never learned anything else and had thought he was built for it, came up to Arthur and stood with his hands opening and closing. "Teach me," he said. "What do you want to be able to do?" Arthur asked. "I want to stand and not shame myself," the young man said. He had tears in his voice and not in his eyes, and Arthur wanted to set that sound on a table and show it to the world. "I want to be the one who strikes because a woman is saying a thing near me and it is true." "Good," Arthur said. "We will begin with your feet." They trained by the river and then in little squares and then in shaded porches when heat pressed too hard. They taught a handful of men and women at a time to move and hit and not be moved when someone shouted. They did not give them swords. They taught them hands, sticks, cords, knots, stones, where to stand so that two people's bodies make a wall that directs men into a space with no room to swing and no line to run, where to step to make somebody else's anger fall past you and use its own weight against itself, how to breathe when you are frightened so that your fear does not use your lungs as puppets. They saw laughter begin where fear had occupied everything. They saw a girl with arms like reeds knock a man sprawling because she had learned to put her whole weight into her foot and not her shoulder and had learned to not think while she did it. They fought a careful fight with a miner sept one morning and did not break its door and did not touch its altar. They touched its stores. They counted sacks of barley and their count did not match the numbers in the ledger a woman produced with offended piety. The woman went red and then white when she discovered her own arithmetic had been sins and not errors. She sat down very straight and said, "Tell me what to write." And Arthur said, "No, you will write what you see." An old knight of the Reach came to find them. He rode in alone on a horse that looked like it had been given good apple peels all its life. He wore his age like farmers wear winter, calmly with layers. He said, "I have made oaths to the faith I will not break. I have made oaths to my lord I will not break. But I will stop men when they strike women who are only talking. I have the strength to do that until I die. I will do it beside you if you let me, and in spite of you if you will not. I will buy you a drink," Oberyn said, and meant it, "and then put you between me and anyone who thinks being old means he must shuffle his feet and not raise his hands." They began to move farther, to places where the water tasted different and the eyes on them changed color and the words spoken over their heads had unguessable histories. They went to a market town that worked because mules worked, and because women who had lost their teeth did not lose their cunning. They went to a little village where a noble with his mother's expensive jaw had set himself up as savior and charged for it. They went to a place between two fields where a lord had put stakes in the ground and said that from one you must throw your grain sack through to the other before bread could be baked, and the people were knocking their shoulders against the wood like cattle with flies. They pulled up stakes and taunted the men who came with ropes about the hands they had, which were not strong enough to not leave lash marks on children. And then the crown came, not with a host, not yet, a message. The hand wrote with tired courtesy. He asked for a meeting. He asked them to come where the Boneway widens and the Red Mountains make a corridor for wind to run through and men to talk where echoes do not carry too far. He signed his name and did not add the king's. He said nothing of arrest or of safe passage. He did not say please, because that would have been a sliver of weakness and he could not afford it. It read simply, "I will speak to you if you will listen." "We will go," Oberyn said. "We will go," Arthur agreed. They went with no more than 4. Ario is not counted because his presence is a kind of counting that changes tallies. The boy with the hitch walked with them because he had learned a way of carrying the spear that made him forget his limp when he faced someone and he liked forgetting. The thin boat woman came because she had something to say to men who had never shared a plank narrower than a bed. The old knight of the Reach wanted to come, but Arthur told him to go to a small village to the west and stand there that day, and if anyone came to harm women who were speaking on a stoop, he should put his body in front of their hands. He went without complaint. He had learned obliqueness in old age. The hand was there with 3 men. He had a face like a map. History traded back and forth across it until the edges were soft and the names of things nearly disappeared. He wore a plain doublet and the kind of sword a man carries because a man should carry one and not because he intends to use it. He looked older than he was. He looked like a man who wanted to put down a heavy load in a room where he did not have to explain why he had carried it so long. "You have made a mess," he said to Oberyn, respectful because his respect cost him nothing, angry because his anger also cost him nothing. "If you were only breaking laws, I would know what to do. You are breaking something else. It makes men who never think leave off their wine and go out into courtyards and ask their wives what they ought to say." "Good," Oberyn said. "Not good," the hand said, and his voice crawled up in volume, and he pressed it down onto a table where it would not leap. "The small folk will be beaten. The small folk will be hung. The lords will torture them to remind their hands what work feels like. You will tell me that beating is already happening. You will be right. You will tell me that beating done in order is not different than beating done out of disorder. You will be wrong. It is not different to the back. It is different to the next day. I can hang a lord for a beating he orders in heat. I cannot hang a lord for a beating done in the service of order. That is the whole cruelty of it. You know this. You came to your plan with your eyes open. I am not lecturing you. I am pleading with you to teach me what to say that will stop the storm you are choosing." Oberyn felt something he had not expected for the hand. Pity, yes, but not the clean pity he held for someone dying. It was a pity for a man who could not change his own logic and lived caged in it with his kindness, making a bed on clean straw and lying down, telling himself that it was better than rot. He wanted to be unkind to that. He wanted to tell him that compassion used as an excuse to do nothing new is worse than none, because it takes the energy from the room and does not feed anyone. He did not say those things. He looked at Arthur and tilted his head and let him speak. Arthur's voice had not been made for court. It had been made for men standing beside him on the morning before a battle when their hands tremble and their mouths want to say the names of the people they love. It had a steadiness that does not need to be loud. He said, "I do not want your job. I will not take your responsibilities and wear them and leave mine. I will not pretend that you have the luxury to be brave when often you do not. I will say this, there are 700 practices that keep one bad custom alive. We are pulling some of them out like pegs. You can pull others from your side. You can order men not to strike when what is said in front of them is true. You can order that no levy may take a man who is caring for a child under 8. You can order that anyone who puts a chain across a spring loses his hand. You can write these down. They will not be obeyed at first, and then they will, and then the world will be different in small ways. The small ways will be enough for now." The hand stared at him as if he had been offered a way to walk a mile without anyone in King's Landing noticing that his footprints made a different pattern. He nodded because the nod was free. "And the faith? The faith is not yours," Arthur said. "It thinks it is a king. Tell it it is not. You have always been able to do that. You have not done it because prayer frightens you. You think prayer will make poor men braver than they have any right to be. It will. That will not be your fault. They are owed bravery. It is not a scarce resource. It does not lessen with use." The hand made a sound that might have been laughter if it had been allowed to breathe twice. "You will not come north," he said. "We will go everywhere," Oberyn said. "We will move along the coasts and the roads and the little dry places in between that kings forget when they count. You will hear of us from men who love you and men who fear you and men who hate everything new because it threatens their magic. Would you take a seat?" The hand asked suddenly, in desperation and brilliance both. "In the King's Council. I will ask you to write your charter and—" "No," Oberyn said, and Arthur shook his head at the exact same moment, and the way their refusal landed on the ground made the men behind the hand take a half-step backward as if a spear had been thrust in the dirt between them. "Your council will ask me to be flattered. I do not do full work flattered. I do useful work angry and delighted and burdened and grinning and sweating and wrong and then less wrong and still wrong and then a little nearer right. Your council cannot bear that." The hand put his palm over his eyes for a moment and then lowered it. "Send me the words," he said. "The ones you want to build with. I will see which ones I can smuggle into law without calling them rebellion." Oberyn nodded. "We will send you words. Do not make them pretty. Words only last when they can be carried in the mouth." They left the corridor of rock with wind at their backs and the sense that someone had set a table a long way off and the plates were empty but the cloth was clean. That night, the boat woman took out a knife and carved into the ore she had taken to carry since she began with them. You cannot praise a fire. If anyone ever asked her why she had cut her beautiful ore, she would not say and the story would not be told. News came like rain in an empty house. Sudden, loud, too much at once and then gone. A minor Tully with boils on his neck ordered 3 men hung for calling a septon a thief, and their wives cut them down, and he ordered the wives beaten, and the village rose and put him in his own chicken coop and fed him stale crusts for 3 days, and then let him out, and he did not forgive them, but he did not order them hung. In the Vale, a new priest tried to take tithes in cobbler's leather because his ledger said money, and the cobbler's wives took the ledger and tore it into papers to line shoes, and the priest cried in the market and said he would tell their lord. Their lord sent him a small pouch of coppers and a letter that said, "Enough." In the Reach, a lord's bannerman slept with his cousin's wife, and the cousin said he was the faith's own justice, and Arthur told him he was a man whose pride was hurt, and he could either be honest and be small or be a liar and be large, and he chose to be small, and no one died. And then there came a letter not meant for them that fell into their hands anyway, carried by a boy who had learned to deliver things without reading them and failed in that discipline because curiosity in young bodies is stronger than fear. It was written by a woman in Lannisport to a man in King's Landing and said that a ship with a black sail and a bone-white prow had come in at night and left with coin, and the ship's captain had been a man with smile lines and a habit of naming every small thing he carried, as if asking the world to acknowledge it exists. It said that a new levy was rumored and that a certain gold cloak had asked whether he could be excused from a duty he had never refused before because he could not bring himself to drag a boy from his mother's lap when the mother was singing to him. It said that people were saying new words in the alley behind the granary. words that did not rhyme and did not sing and yet stuck to the tongue like bread. A raven from Sunspear carried a sheet in Doran's hand that said, "No." Then another the next day that said, "Not yet." Then a week later a third that said, "If you must, then with a hand as gentle as your mouth is not." Oberyn sent back 3 sheets. The first, "I know." The second, "I will send the children to you when this turns." The third, written late at night when Arthur slept and there was a smell of wood smoke on the air that was not their own. It is not possible to keep blood from grief. We can keep it from meaninglessness. That is my work. Our work. Do not forgive me unless you must. They went inland for a season and taught in a barn, and in a field left fallow, and in a lord's disused dovecot. They made a working out of a practice. When you go to a place, you do no harm to its stores. You sleep no more nights than you are wanted. You leave behind something to eat, something written, and something that can be used as a weapon if a hand is brave and a heart is angry and a head is clear. They left behind cords with knots in them and the knowledge of what a cord and a knot can do to a wrist with a sword in it. They left behind the sentence, "You cannot strike a woman while she is speaking and call yourself brave." They left behind a way to look at a man in armor that made him feel cold because he knew you saw him as a person and not as a wall. The faith began to rearm itself in desire if not in law. Men began to call themselves swords and stars again in whispers that tasted of old songs. A young zealot with eyes as blue as a frozen lake hit a man with a stick in a market and called it godly correction, and Arthur caught the stick and put the boy's hand behind his back and held him so carefully that the boy began to cry because care feels like love when you have not been given any. Arthur said into the boy's ear, "You can be sharp without being cruel." And the boy said into Arthur's shoulder, "Then what will make me strong?" And Arthur said, "Not that," and let him go. And the boy went away and later would return to give them a piece of information so precious and simple it would shift a whole day's outcome like a hand on a scale. They claimed a little town without claiming it. A bend in the river, a row of low houses, a square where bread was sold and politics were always discussed in low voices and high laughter. They called it Fishercross because the overbridge threw a shadow across the water in the shape of a net when sun rose behind it. They made it a place where their words could be said in daylight. They told no one that. People felt it and came. A woman with a scar running from temple to chin appeared on the second day with her daughter and 2 boys who had not known their father and had learned to move together in a fight. The woman looked at Arthur and said, "If I stand behind you, I will make you stronger. If I stand in front of you, I will make you kinder. Place me where you like." He placed her beside the thin boat woman and watched them decide to respect each other without sermon. Oberyn was inside an old brewhouse giving a man with red hair a lesson in the difference between arguing and thinking when a bell rang that had never rung before because they had hung it that morning. The sound cut through the air without resonance, honest and thin. Areo was already moving when the bell's echo fell to the floor. Arthur got there before him because speed had become something he could coax from his body the way you coax flame from a damp stick. You are surprised when it answers and then grateful. Men were coming across the bridge in pairs with cudgels and leather strips wound around their hands, and the look of men paid to hurt the correct people and told their God approved. They wore no livery and no faith tokens. They were the worst kind of enemy, which is to say the ordinary kind doing their day's work. Behind them moved a man with a sword at his side and a substantial belly. He did not look like a zealot. He looked like a steward. He was a steward. He had taken money from both a lord and a sept to see the charterers broken in Fishercross. He walked with the satisfaction of a problem that will finally be over by supper, which is often the moment a man misreads history most completely. Arthur stood in the square and let the men see him. He did not lift his sword. He did not have his sword. It remained wrapped where it belonged because it would not be used to teach such men. He held a short spear in a fisherman's grip and looked like the coachman of some decent house who had decided to ruin his afternoon with discipline. Oberyn appeared at his shoulder and the thin boat woman at his other, and Areo set his axe head down on the cobbles and leaned on its haft like a farmer with a yoke. "You will leave," Arthur said to the steward. The man laughed and gestured with 2 fingers without looking behind him. 2 men came forward and swung their cudgels precisely. Arthur stepped into the swing, inside the arc where an arm has no power, and put his palm under the man's elbow and his other hand behind his neck and lay him down on the stone with the kind of kindness that hurts and heals. Oberyn took the second with his spear haft, broke the momentum of the swing, then brought the butt around into the man's mouth. Teeth clicked. Blood came. The man tried to be brave and swallowed too quickly and gagged on it and sat down without knowing he had chosen to. Then came the press. It was not elegant. Men need practice to be elegant, and these men had not practiced. They came as a wave that meant to simply walk through, and found instead that the square had been arranged for this. The charterers had set benches and barrels and boxes to make lanes that looked random until two men tried to swing together and found themselves in each other's way. They had taken the cobbles and chalked them and then scrubbed the chalk away and taught their bodies to find the shapes when breath was running. They put their women and their old men where their hands knew best, and the boys with knives where knives would not be needed, but where the sight of a knife prevented a fool and saved a friend from a cut that would turn feverish in a week. It did not look like victory. It looked like men getting tired because their work had always been easy. It looked like the moment when a man who has been paid 3 coins to hurt strangers thinks of his wife and the way she puts bread on a plate without asking him what he thinks. It looked like the steward stepping back to preserve his important body while other men took the blows. It looked like Areo lifting his axe not to strike but to strike a sound in the air, a kind of shaping of attention that makes men unsure of themselves because the world suddenly has more dimensions than their wages had accounted for. It looked like Arthur stepping and stepping, putting his shoulder briefly where it could shift another man's weight, speaking as he moved because breath is there and he has always known where to put it. Not there. Here. Now. Good. That is enough. Do not hit him again. Leave him. He is done. You are not a butcher. And it looked like Oberyn laughing with delight and not cruelty, because this was the part his body had waited for. The proof that joy belongs in the work when it is done to stop harm. When it was over, the steward lay on his side on the stone with his face sweaty and his belt undone and his eyes full of the knowledge that he had been wrong. He would carry that knowledge like a polished stone in his pocket for years and take it out in the dark when fear made him think of doing a new wrong. He would hold it and remember the day he was stopped and the afternoon did not go as he had planned. He would not become good. He would become more careful. It would be something. Arthur went to him and put his boot on the man's wrist where his hand lay open by his hip. The steward met his gaze and found that it did not do harm, but it did not forgive. Arthur said, "You have a choice. You can say you were sent by men who love God and punishing is God's work. You can say that and find men like you to nod with you until you are dead. Or you can say you wanted money and small power and you took it and it did not make you large. I will know which you choose. You will not be able to tell me otherwise." The man tried to lift his hand and found it politely constrained by the boot. "You are a knight," he said. "No," Arthur said. "That word is a chain also. I am a man with a job. My job today was to make sure men who like to be paid for hurting strangers do not get paid. I have done that job. Your job is to find out whether you have one. I suspect you do not." He lifted his boot and the man's hand was free and flopped, and then lay still because his will discovered it had no strength left in it. After, children ran in the square where men had stood, the way children always find a space just as the last grows man-sized and empty, and they played with sticks and reap. Aided sentences they had heard and turned them into boasts and jests. The thin boat woman sat on a barrel and finally let herself laugh, bending over with it and pressing her hand to her stomach as if to keep the laugh from pulling her in half. Areo found a bench that had witnessed the whole and sat on it, and the bench creaked and then accepted him with a small, relieved sigh, as if it too had been doing work and now could rest. Oberyn caught Arthur by the elbow when he passed, and they stood at the edge of the square together the way men stand at windows and look out at rain, content without speaking. They were tired and would be sore in the morning, and their hands smelled like a day. Not war, work. The work had been heavy and honest and had not required poetry. It had required a sketch on dust and a decision and feet that knew where to go when men who loved order more than people came into a place. "We have time," Oberyn said. "We have enemies," Arthur said. "Of course," Oberyn said cheerfully. "Why else live? I am more frightened of being irrelevant." "Before that comes the trap," Arthur said. and his eyes shifted to find the place in the air where the next trouble had already begun to take shape. He had the sense that you get when the wind changes and you have no word for the new direction and have to use the words you have and know they are wrong. They will ask us to choose between someone we love and someone we do not. They will put the small under the large and the large under the small and see whether we can hold both with our hands. That will be the moment that matters most. Then we will prepare our hands, Oberyn said. We will make more of them. Look. He pointed with his chin to the girl who had knocked a man sprawling because she had learned to stand with her weight in her feet instead of in her shoulder. She was showing another boy how to place his heel. She had him do it 4 times. She corrected his patience once with a sharp word. There is the work. When we die, there will be hands like that. I find it easy to sleep with that in my head. Arthur made a small sound that might have been assent and might have been a grief he had not allowed to speak. He took out the blue cloth and looked down at it and then put it back. Dawn had not left its wrap in weeks, and that felt like something more than self-denial. It felt like a promise kept to the idea of what swords are for. A new letter came from Sunspear. This one was not in Doran's hand. It was in a girl's. Quick, precise, without ornament. Amused even when it did not mean to be. Said, simply, your words have put new things in the water gardens. Children are deciding what is fair with fewer tears. It may be nothing. It may be the shape of a river opening its mouth. Keep with it. Also, you are a fool, uncle. Do not make a hostage of your heart where you know men can see it. Oberyn smiled and was tenderly insulted. He did not show the letter to Arthur. He told him the important part with his mouth. A winter still far off sent its first hints, the kind that are in lighter mornings and bluer shadows and freshening winds that bring the scent of distant snows to noses that do not know what snows are. Fishercross built a hall. It was not large. It was made of wood and labor and the small pride of men who had decided to not ask permission. They called it the Free Hall because they had no imagination and because the hall did not need an imaginative name. Inside it, they hung a cord on the wall with knots tied in it and a club and a basket and a ledger with pages left blank on purpose because blank pages are also promises. They wrote the charter's words over the door. They did not burn a candle to consecrate it. They baked bread in its oven and they ate it because that is a way to say holy that gods approve if gods approve of anything. It was that day, a minor day, a work day, no feast, no blood, that a rider in the livery of the rock came to the edge of the square and watched with bright, cold eyes and then went away without being noticed by anyone who did not make it their business to notice everything. It was that day that a septon in a minor village told a group of women he had no intention of allowing them to speak over his head about the distribution of grain, and one of the women laughed, and the sound felt to him like an insult, and he slapped her, and then saw 3 old men stand and put their backs between him and his parishioners and felt his stomach turn to water and his face to paper and discovered what fear is without its ornaments. It was that night that a boat slid under the bridge at Fishercross with a cargo not of fish or barrels but of letters and knives because there were always letters and there were always knives. Oberyn sat on the threshold of the Free Hall and watched children and thought about how his hands had bound to this and how the shape of his life, which had been a spear, now also contained a ledger and a cord and a bench and a bell. He had not lost his appetite. He had broadened it. Arthur sat with Dawn wrapped and untouched and the knowledge that the next time he drew it would need to be the right time because the world had been retuned and that sound would ring too far if struck wrong. Ready? Oberyn asked. For the rest, Arthur said. For what's next? Oberyn said. Arthur looked at him and nodded. And a gust of wind came through the square and lifted dust and laughter together and set them down where they belonged. They did not wait for the trap to find them. It came anyway, as such things do, carried by men practiced at putting a hand where a heart is and closing. 2 mornings after the Free Hall's oven saw its first loaves baked for those who had nothing to trade, a boy who had learned to listen ran from the bridge with breath like fire and said that boats with no painted names had been seen at the mouth of the Honeywine after midnight, men loading box after box Sunday. Our tarp, and that a Lannister rider had watched Fishercross from the hill and turned away when he knew his face had not been noticed. Oberyn stood with the loaf knife in his hand, crumbs on his palm, and the shape of it fit a thought he had been refusing. They would not be answered with creeds first. They would be answered with coin and flame. They will light a place and move a treasury in the same hour, he said. He did not raise his voice. He placed the knife on the table and brushed crumbs into his hand and tipped them to a child. "They will make us choose." Arthur's silence agreed with him. The quiet he made had weight. He turned the wrapped blue cloth in his hands and then set it back on the bench where it had learned to lie without stirring. "We split," he said. "You go where there is smoke. I go where there is counted wealth." "Areo, I will stand where the fire will be," Areo said. He was already lifting the axe to his shoulder. He did not say why. He hardly ever said why. You knew. He loved villages and squares and the spaces where men met other men's children and put out their hands without meaning to. He loved places he could measure with 2 strides and know where to put his back. "Nairai," Oberyn called, and the boat woman appeared as she always did, as if the space had left a notch for her to step into. She had no beauty men like to name and pocket. She had used that made men uneasy until they remembered themselves. She had carved the ore and now carried it with a possessiveness that came off her like a heat shimmer. "You take Arthur to the river. He will want a boat that lies low and doesn't talk. And you will want someone who says please when he asks for a thing in dark water." Nairai nodded once. "We launch from the willow root," she said. "Bring Jas. He has learned to stand on a plank and not make it sound like a drum." Jas came at a run. The hitch that had been his shame had become, because he'd been taught and had practiced, simply the way he moved. He had learned to lay weight where it served him, not where habit flung it. He kept his face steady when Arthur put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Find your heel." The boy said it precisely as he'd been taught to do, and they ran for the river, which is to say they did not run at all. They went with the speed of people who have already agreed with their bodies. Oberyn watched them go and then looked at the low roofs of Fishercross as if they had been entrusted to him one by one, and he had read each roof's letter and signed for it. He went through the square and touched the bell rope once with his hand purely to know how it felt and then did not pull it. He moved into the little lanes and looked at where the cobbles were uneven and where a bench had been unhelpfully left in the way and where 2 doors together could be used to make a corner hard to pass if 6 bodies understood themselves. It had become a habit. The habit was now the work itself. Ser Denwell, the old Reach Knight they had bought a drink for and then given a task, fell in step beside him, his horse's reins in his hand. He had taken to walking in towns because he liked the way children ignored a horse and thus ignored his importance. "North wind in the morning," Ser Denwell said, tasting it. "If there is smoke, it will blow toward the mill. Then we will put water at the mill," Oberyn said, and sent 2 boys and an old woman whose voice made men straighten to carry buckets and cords. He did not say to them not to be heroes. He trusted them not to be stupid. You cannot talk a man out of a fire he wants to walk into. You can give him other work and let his feet find it and his mind catch up. When smoke came, it came from 2 directions at once, because the steward who had been made careful by shame had told men with coin that his lesson had taught him where others would cut. One blaze took a shed of cordwood on Fishercross's south edge where a lane poured into the square. The other took a roof 2 doors down from the free hall, set by a man with a lantern and a prayer muttered through his teeth because he thought that made the flame obedient. He did not see Areo until the axe's head came down on the lantern and the flame went out with a foolish little sigh, as if it had been promised an evening and had been denied its small entertainment. "Not here," Areo said. His voice could make a child set down a stolen apple and feel proud of having done it. The man went for his knife at his waist. The knife did not get far. Areo's hand caught his sleeve, then his wrist, then the air underneath his elbow, and the man's hand found itself telling him a new story about how much it liked pain. He dropped the knife because the knife did not want to share that story. Beyond, the woodshed's blaze made its own choices. Oberyn sent the old Reach Knight there with a bucket brigade of boys and old men who remembered floods. The lane had been chalked and scrubbed and taught to make its own little unsteady river, and that memory helped the water they carried find the place it wanted to go. They hauled the stacks apart with hooks before fire could feed fire, and the wind threw sparks at them like an insult, and they answered not with words but with more water. It was not grand. Fishercross was never grand. Its defense worked because it had been thought of overbred and while tying knots and between 2 laughs at a child's foolery. The men who came to burn came with the certainty that comes from pay and a bell or two that rings when you need it to ring. They met instead old women whose feet remembered thresholds better than any soldier and young boys whose bodies had been taught to be hard in the angles and not in their faces. Oberyn stood with his spear braid loose and laughing because he did not know how to separate joy and rage without hurting himself, and a Lannister man, young, good beard, clean eyes large enough to see the trouble in them, made a mistake and thought to eke a name off a Dornish prince. He came long and level, blade true. Oberyn stepped aside as if making room for a dancer in a crowded room and touched the man's knee with the underside of his spear. "Not bad," Oberyn told him. "Fuck you," the man said with unpracticed hatred. "Better?" Oberyn told him, and took his wrist and turned it and made the sword admit its fault and kiss the ground. "Listen to me. Take 2 men you trust. Run. When anyone asks, say you were brave and cut and retreat was called because the wind was against your fire. That way you have saved something you need most, a spine. If you stay, you will lose your spine and get given a purse and a story to tell that will taste like ash in your mouth when you are 50. The man looked at him and knew he was being given a white flag that was not a shame. He nodded because nodding cost nothing and left because leaving cost everything. He did not realize he had been saved until he stood under a tree and heard his breathing slow. Later, he would say he had been cowardly. He would be wrong. He had been given a difficult choice and had taken it. That is its own kin of courage. Ser Denwell took a beam on his shoulder because no one else saw it tilt in time. He swayed and set it down and swayed again and almost smiled because the body tells truths that mouths hesitate to say. Later that day he would die, but not before he had helped the beam to a safer place and sworn at the wind and told a boy to find his heel. When he did die, he did not do it grandly. He sat on a doorstep and let his breath go and put his head back on the warm stone and said his wife's girlhood name, which he had not spoken in 40 years, and smiled because his hands had found good work on the last day. They wrapped him in sailcloth because there was no silk and it would have made him angry. While Fishercross became a thing that could not be burned, the Honeywine saw a different kind of fire. A rush of men with need in their faces and orders in their mouths drove 3 laden barges between quays and under half-hoisted chains and a night that did not yet know itself morning. The woman with the ledger stood inside the starry September with her hand on a book and watched through the front heraldry glass a smear of lanterns on the river, and when she turned to speak, there was no one. She put the ledger down and went to the window and put her palm to the cold of the diamond lead. Nyrai's boat made no sound. That was a lie. Boats always speak if you know what words to hear, but hers whispered like a mother in a room where someone sleeps. It slid under the willow roots and took the river's shallow heart. Arthur and Joss lay flat in it while Nyrai stood with the pole and listened to the water with her feet. She smelled heat through cold on the air and did not waste her words on fear, because fear chews time. "There," Joss said. He had good eyes in waterlight. The barge's shapes were enormous and foolish, like oxen in a narrow street thinking they were cats. Chains had been left slack over the water to catch drift. Now they took on purpose. Men on the quays hauled at them, 3 teams pulling at once to pinch a channel and keep the barges where a steward could count them like sheep. Arthur looked and judged distances in the way his body now did, not as a fighter first, but as someone who had learned to count breath and consequences at the same rate. "We will not fight them all," he said. "We will take the pin from the hinge and let the gate decide for us." Nyrai's mouth went a little thin because she respected that thought and hated it for how right it was. She pivoted the pole low so its end slipped under a sheet of black on black where the current lay like a cat. "Put your hands where I say," she said. "You are good with weapons. Let water be the weapon. It is tired of being a blessing tonight." They slid toward the control that made a lock. An old thing, the color of iron, pitted, loved by rust more than by men. It had a chain thicker than a fisherman's leg running to a winch and a geared bar that could be cranked until links rose and sluice doors bit water. 2 men sat at it, yawning. One had a nose like a gull's beak. The other had the heavy look of a man who has always been respected by rooms that should have been kinder to him and has grown into that respect like a shoe that never fit. They watched the first barge glide and the second bump and the third come in wide and cursed at what they assumed were sailors' errors. Arthur went silently onto the platform and set a hand on the gull-nosed man's shoulder and the other on a lever. "Do not move," he said. The man did not move. He did what he was told. The other rose slowly, nature warring with the habit of being obeyed. Arthur shook his head once. The man sat down. "Joss," Nyrai said, and the boy came up beside her like a fish that has decided the world above is also water. Nyrai set his hands where they must go on the ratchet and showed him the block. His strong leg set, his bad leg anchored him more honestly than a strong leg would have done. That pleased Nyrai. Men who think they need two perfect legs to work a river are fools. "When he says," she said, and inclined her chin toward Arthur. Joss breathed. He found his heel without needing to be told. Arthur unwrapped the sword. He did it without ceremony. In another life, such a movement would have deserved a hall and a hush and a hymn no one knows the words to until they are taught them by sight. He did it as if he were bringing a tool from a cloth because he was. Dawn came free and made the air look as if it had learned to glow. The two men at the lock blinked and had to swallow, the way you swallow when you have been told the truth unexpectedly and your mouth tries to make saliva to match it. Arthur held the sword low, the way a man would hold a hand he respects. "You will not be cut," he told the men. "You will be made wiser by a thing you know the name of." They nodded without wishing to agree with him because agreement felt like a falling in love and they had wives. He placed the blade under the thick chain where it lay under tension, lifted just enough to make the link yearn toward its opposite, and brought the sword very, very slowly down and back. The sound it made was quiet. The hush a table makes when cloth is drawn smooth and all the plates sigh. The link parted, not with drama, not with the song men write for such moments. The chain's end dropped into the water with a muffled cough. The winch stutters stopped. The sluice doors jolted just enough to let water speak. "Now," Arthur said. Joss put his weight where Nyrai had shown him. He leaned with his heel. He breathed like counting. The ratchet's teeth climbed the gear and the doors gave, and a rush went through that narrow shape like a throat clearing. The first barge clunked off true, shouldering to a wall that did not mind. The second spun its slow, stubborn spin, and men on its deck tried to find the river with their curses and failed because the river did not need their names. The third, wide, arrogant, foolish because it had been told it had an appointment and meant to make it, wedged between a quay post and its sister barge. The steward on the quay with the seal ring on his small finger made a hand gesture that said bring it back, as if water could be negotiated with. Could not. The door's rise increased the churn beneath the barges. The undertug peeled them off the keys in its own rhythm, and the stern rope snapped like example. Nyrai laughed once, involuntarily, the laugh of a woman watching men discover that her craft is not trickery but attention. "Down," she told Joss, and he obeyed with precision and speed rare in boys because the rhythm had been in him a while now. The water equalized. The barges slid in slow, graceless beauty. Boxes shifted on their decks and men grabbed ropes and none of it mattered. The river had the weight, carried what it wanted. The careful man from the high tower, thin, hands kept still in his lap in the habit of his class, appeared out of the dark in a cloak the color of private thoughts. Arthur looked at him without surprise. Nyrai did not look at him at all. Joss stared because boys must measure themselves against men who do not breathe hard and are not wet and do not shout in emergencies. "You should not be here," the careful man said gently. "I am here because you are," Arthur said. "If you leave this to the men who count, there will be fire in places you cannot put hands. If you believe yourself responsible, take responsibility. These boxes go nowhere today." "They are the starry Septembers," the careful man said. "They are not," said the woman with the ledger from the sept doorway, appearing like an answer to a question the careful man had not had the courage to ask. She held a page in her hand that had wanted to be bound and be respectable and be unexamined until it fell apart, and which had been brought into air. "They are the people's, coin given for bread that was never given, for candles that should have lit work and instead were set in high windows to make men think other men holy." She realized that she was speaking a speech. She stopped. She looked at Arthur. He nodded once and she took a breath and then a step toward the careful man. You asked me that day whether I had been hungry. I have learned what the word is shaped like. These are not for the sept today. They are for those who will not live to see the end of the week. Arthur turned to the two men at the lock. You did not resist. You will not be punished. You will be thanked. You will be told by your mothers that you showed sense when sense was asked and will be fed well at supper. Tell that to yourselves now. You will need it when men come tomorrow and tell you you were traitors. We were guards, said the gull-nosed man, as if discovering an old proverb. We guarded the river from foolishness. He straightened a little, a thing he had not done for years in that particular place. The barges cleared and drifted into water that did not belong to anyone's steward. Nyrai's boat took them down the quiet side, letting shadows do their work. Arthur did not put the blade away. He did not hold it high. He put it across his thighs in the boat and thought of dawn as he had refused to think of it, what it had been asked to be and what it might, at last, be allowed to be. It had not drunk blood today. It had cut a chain. Back in Fishercross, smoke still streaked the wind and the bell had been rung twice, sharply, and then not at all. The free hall's door had taken a kick and did not remember it. Oberyn stood in the square with 3 men holding their noses and 1 woman holding a baby, and Ario with soot on one cheek like a boy caught with his hand in a dish, and Ser Denwell on a bench with his hand folded loosely on his knee as if he were about to speak and then had not. Oberyn saw the set of his jaw and the peace in his mouth and knew. He did not say the old knight's name. He took the axe from Ario with a look and set it against the bench leg in thanks and reverence both. None dead but one, Ario said. Enough to mark the day, Oberyn answered. They met again at noon the next day under the willow where the breeze shook dust down like a benediction. Nyrai had slept for an hour with her head on her oar and one hand closed over the carved words. A guard asleep on duty because the duty had been done. Joss had slept on the ground and woke ready to be told what he had to do, and found he had the luxury of being told, eat first. Arthur had not slept. He did not look like a man who had not slept. He sat with the sword wrapped beside him and watched children push sticks into the bank and pull them out with blackened tips and shout triumphantly as if this were proof of courage. The woman with the ledger sat near but not in their circle, her book closed, her eyes full of numbers and other things harder to enumerate. The city shook, she reported, not bothering to ask whether they wanted the report. Such a question is for people who must flatter. Men shouted. A steward lost his post and swore he would pray for the man who had undone him. A boy sang your sentence about chains on the steps and was not beaten this time because his mother stayed his hand and took him home before the Hightower's men found their breath. The High Septon spoke many words and none of them mattered. The High Septon rarely speaks words that matter when coin has been moved under his windows, Oberyn said. He prefers to speak them when a poor man steals a loaf in a holy house and then his voice carries like a bell. He looked toward the road that turned north and west. The wind bent grass courteously. The rider with the rock's colors? Sent to lick his clever master's boot and tell him Dornishmen are up to the old tricks, Ario said. He will do that. The Lannisters will pretend to count until they can count men and not boxes. Then they will send a man with a pleasant voice and a closed hand. They will send 2 men and a choice, Arthur said. I will not put the choice in our mouths for them. We will put one there for ourselves. They did not raise a banner. They set a date. A week beyond, on the day when markets were busiest on the lower Honeywine and after the levies gathered in the reach to count and be seen by lords who grew handsome on their men's height, they would take their words to Old Town's front. Not to the starry September's heart. That would have been a second trap, a shadow of an old story, easy for men who hate novelty to turn into a familiar hymn, but to the square outside, where women sold onions and girls plucked geese and boys ran under wheels and men stood under the sun and tried not to want any trouble because the last time they had wanted it, trouble had come and they'd lost a week's wages. They would speak their plain lines, and they would not bring spears. They would bring cords and oars and a ledger. Will the hand meet us? Nyrai asked. She did not look up. She shaved a curl of wood off her oar with a little knife and let it fall. Yes, Arthur said. He will not be able to keep from it. He will come because he believes in good order more than he believes in being obeyed. That makes him one of us for an hour. And Barristan? Oberyn asked. He will come because if someone draws steel, he wants to be standing between it and a child, Arthur said. He has always liked that job. They went, not as a host, as a procession that refused to call itself procession. Boats slid down, boats came up, carts went slow to avoid rutting wheels, women took baskets the way a sword takes a hand. Children were not told to be quiet and found they spoke less because they knew words would be asked of them later and wanted to spend them well. The free hall's bell rope was left unguarded. It did not need guarding. Things have their time to be stolen and their times to be invisible. This was the second. Old Town turned its face toward them with curiosity and fatigue, and the hunger a city has when it hears rumor that bread is set on a table that is not inside a locked window. The high tower made no gesture. The starry September rang no bell. Men with calm hands stood where they always stood to watch for fire, and men with nervy mouths stood where they always stood to run errands. The careful man put on a coat that could mean anything and stood where he could speak quickly to anyone in a half-dozen directions. The woman with the ledger came without her book. That was wisdom. Books make men think about theft first and reading second. Oberyn stepped up onto a cart whose owner had been paid with a loaf and the promise of not saying his cart was being used. He thought of Elia because he always thought of Elia when voices gathered. He thought of how she would have cocked her head to hear the not said. He did not speak first. He lifted his hand to Arthur, and Arthur looked at his hands and then at the faces and then at the ground and then up. I have a sword that men sing about, he said. He did not raise his voice. He said the sentence to the woman whose onion skins were piling in the gutter. I have learned not to use it unless I remade the reason for which it was forged. The river told me that. A chain told me that. A woman's ledger told me that. You know this because you live here. You do not need me to say it. I will say what you came to hear. We will not pay tithes until children have eaten and the sick have been tended and the old have a safe seat by a fire. We will not work 3 days for 1 day's bread. We will not be hit in the mouth for speaking. We will not be forced to wear a god like a collar. We will not be told to love a throne for the way it sits. We have set this down in words any child can remember. Say them back. He spoke the charter's lines then, the plain phrases they had agreed upon in dust, and the square said them back as if they had been born in that act of repetition. The high septon came to the top of the starry September steps, because he could not. He was not a fool. He was not a man of courageous thought, either. He listened long enough to be certain of what this was not: riot, blasphemy, a trick of bandits. And then he heard what it was, and his expression, trained to regard everything as a play put on for him by God, went blank with an emotion he could not name: irrelevance. He reached for anger because anger had always put heat in his blood when his sermons came limp. It did not answer him with the same willingness. He had made too much coin this month and not enough confession. The hand came from the direction of the fish market with 3 men, one of whom kept constantly looking at roofs. Barristan was not visible, and then he was, and when he was, boys who had decided they would die for a chance to kill a knight found themselves relieved because they would have to run that day to keep from ending the world before its time. The hand stopped 3 paces from Oberyn's cart. He did not look up or down. He looked directly, which is a dangerous thing to do in a square when people stare. You will cause men to die, he said, because that is often the first sentence of men who want to save the most possible. We already have, Oberyn said. You make this argument to lords who levy when the harvest is thin. You make it to men with rings who order boys pulled down from singing because the song irritates them. Make it to us if you like. We will not be insulted. We have brought you lines to put into law in the language you prefer. Some of your men will misapply them. Others will use them to save their hands. That will be enough. I have read worse terms in better script, the hand said. I have even put some of them into the king's mouth and watched him spit them out because he did not like the taste. You will ask me to write them again, and I will, and perhaps he will swallow. Politic enough. But you will ask me to strip the faith of its revenue and tell its priests that their sanctity tastes like theft. I cannot do that today. You cannot. Arthur agreed with a smoothness that made men who had come to fight with words have to take their hands off their hilts because they had nothing to hit. We can. We have. It will reach you when you have learned a new skill. Taking credit for goodness you did not think of first. Practice. It will save lives. Laughter went like a soft wind across the square. Not cruel. Even the hand's mouth moved because he recognized the medicine he had been given. He held out his hand, palm up, no ring forward, no gaudy signet, and the woman with the ledger placed in it a page that was not a ledger page. It was a list of villages and numbers that were not coin but mouths and wells and seed sacks. He read and then looked at the High Septon, whose cheeks flushed because in that moment the simple arithmetic of who had been hungry could not be concealed by robes or ornaments. "You will yield the tithe," the hand said to him. He did not couch it as a question. "You will yield it until I am satisfied that no child will die of hunger within sight of a September. Then we will weigh law as law should be weighed." The High Septon found his voice and it surprised him. It sounded ordinary. "If I do this," he said, "I will have to speak with my God and he will be angry. If your God is angered by your kindness," the woman with the ledger said, in a voice neither ordinary nor grand, simply the voice of someone who has put her hand on a table and knows the grain. "You have been worshipping the wrong thing." Men took breath as if they had been slapped gently and told to wake. The hand handed the page back and lifted his other hand, and the careful man stepped forward with a small writing case. He took out paper. He took out ink. He set his jaw as if about to do a thing he had no permission to do and would do anyway, because when a thing is right you cannot always wait for the blessing of those who will take credit later. "I will write," he said, "that in my name as Hand of the King, until further writ, tithes are suspended in all villages where hunger has struck in 2 seasons past, that the levy may not take the keeper of a child under 8 years, nor the sole livelihood of any household, that no chain may be set across a spring, that men who beat women for speaking in public will be brought before a court with witnesses to answer for their weakness in courage, that any sept that fails this test will have its stores catalogued and distributed by the closest hall in which people meet to settle their own affairs. I will send this with my men. They will go by fast horse and by boat. They will carry swords sheathed. If you strike them, you will be striking the hand that offers you what you asked." He looked directly at Oberyn and then at Arthur. "If you break this before it has had its day, if you make of it a banner instead of a bread, I will come myself and take it back from your hands. I hope I will fail. I am tired of failing." The square heard something strange. A man in power speaking a true doubt about himself. It is rarer music than any harp. Softened nothing, sharpened everything. It made the crowd a place where mercy could grow because a ceiling had been lifted long enough to let in air. Barristan stepped to one side, between the High Septon and the stairs, because he had seen a man's eyes go black before, and he saw it now in the holy man's gaze as he looked at the crowd and at the loss of the old ease. He did his job without honorific or trumpet. He looked at the young zealot who had struck a man earlier in a market and who now stood on the outer edge, and shook his head a fraction, and that was enough. The boy held his stick a little lower and did not move his feet. A woman stepped forward, the scarred one, the one who had said she would make a man stronger or kinder. She carried no weapon. She carried a loaf. She lifted it high enough that the square could see the crust break where her nails had pressed it, then lowered it and set it on the step. It seemed a foolish little thing, but there is no foolishness in placing bread where men will climb to speak. 6 others did the same. The steps took 7 loaves. The air changed. That was how the charter entered the city. Not with a sack of coin on a priest's table, not with a drawn blade, but with bread. "Stay," the hand said to Oberyn and Arthur, not as command, as invitation and necessity. "We will write the words and we will seal them and we will send them. Then go. Do not stay the night. I cannot protect you from men who will call themselves saviors. The saviors are always hungriest before they are fed." They waited while the careful man wrote, and while the seal was warmed and impressed, and while messengers were given routes and names and the old sign for urgent used. By men who run without breath held. They waited while the High Septon sat on a step and looked at his own hands and saw what they were. Not instruments, not sacraments, just hands. He found that he did not hate them for that. He stood when he could and said softly to the woman with the ledger, "You will return?" She nodded. Then bring your book. He did not know whether he meant it. He would learn. That evening, outside the city, the Lannister men made their second try. They were clever. They did not come with torches. They came with parchment. A man born to count, wearing a red ring, stepped out and held up a writ that had all the magic in Westeros when it was backed by coin and men. Permission, orders, precedents, witnesses. He called it by 6 names at once to see which one would cow. Areo took the parchment from him with his big hand and examined the seal with baffled artist's interest. Oberyn said, "No," in the tone of father uses when a child reaches for a pot with steam coming out. The man smiled the smile of someone who has bought better men than these with less. He lifted his hand. Men rose from the ditch line with crossbows. Old Town's field kept its quiet a half-breath too long and then learned what an ambush is. A sudden presence of choice. Arthur did not look at Dawn. He looked at the ditch. "Down," he called, and the boys went down as if smacked by the hand of God. The first volley took too much sky. The bolts sang the wrong note and thudded behind them. The second would not. Nyrai stepped in front of the old knight's bench, which had been brought out from Fishercross in a wagon for reasons no one would be able to explain later, and lifted the oar and set it at an angle and let 2 bolts hit wood with a satisfying honesty. Joss rolled to the side on his bad leg and came up and flung a cord that caught a crossbowman's ankle when he took his next step forward down the ditch edge. The man fell with the surprised indignity of a child who has been told he is not the only creature that can choose where his body goes. Arthur moved. He did not move as knights do when they show off. He went the way men go when they are clearing a table, quick and without flourish. He stepped in, not out. He placed hands where wrists want to remember their youth and lose their strength at once. He spoke a steady word into 3 panicked breaths, and those breaths slowed just enough to keep 3 blades where they were. Oberyn spun his spear and did not throw it. He used its length to dissuade, not to harpoon, and laughed when a crossbowman shot at its shadow and hit nothing anyone cared about. Areo, who had no patience for men behind other men, stepped into the ditch and took 2 bolts, one in the shoulder, one in the meat of his upper arm, and looked at them, annoyed, like a man who finds rain in a house and discovers the roof has been cut by a guest. He climbed, slowly because the body must be asked, and arrived at the lip where the crossbowman reloaded and laid a palm on his forehead like a blessing and then pushed. The man tumbled backward with a sound that would later keep him from sleeping. Then the shout from behind. Men who had wanted to be 1 step cleverer and had not told their friends came in from the road where Fishercross's carts waited. They would have burned the carts if they could have found flame in their pockets. They could not. Children had taken what they didn't know they were taking when they bored holes in the pitch casks earlier to look for shells. The pitch had already run into the ground in little black ribbons as curious and ruined as ink spilled by a poet. Those children would remember it. They would save a needless death 60 years later by wanting to see what was inside a barrel. By the time it was over, there were 5 men with broken hands and 2 with shame in their ankles and 1 with a bolt through the meat of his calf. There were no corpses. Oberyn would have called that a victory even if they had been beaten. They had not been. The man with the red ring went to one knee because a person's legs sometimes learn courtesy when his mouth does not. He held up the parchment again, as if the world could be made to renew itself by a good wax seal shown to the right eyes. Arthur took the parchment and folded it carefully and placed it in the man's coat. "Keep that," he said. "Do not use it again. It will make you feel important and then useless. That is a bad hunger." On the road back, Barristan caught them. He had been sent to keep the peace and had done so by moving where he had to with a grace that was not simply footwork. He looked at Areo's arm and said, "Sit," and took out a small knife and cut the bolt and pulled it, and Areo breathed once. "Again," Barristan said, and Areo breathed again. "Good." He bound it with a strip of cloth that had been a pennant once. It had been torn from a pole in a fight that did not deserve it and now kept a good arm from ruining itself. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the bundle. He did not ask whether the sword had been used. He knew. "Jean will hold," he said, meaning the hand. "He will hold until somebody who hunts too hard and thinks too little remembers that he likes to be loved." He did not name the king because naming him would have made it petty, and he was not petty. When that comes, choose your hill. Do not bring spears to the Red Keep's gate. You will feed them a story they are starving to tell, and they will make you into its villain like hungry men will eat even rotten fruit. We will not go to the gate, Arthur said. We will go to the wells and the mills and the benches in the halls where women decide prices. We will go to everything men in velvet do not consider holy and are wrong about. The weeks after that were made chiefly of letters and travel, and the ordinary work of teaching people to be braver in little rooms. The hands' orders went out, and some were obeyed, and some were mocked, and some were lost in Dick. He's and others were used as pillows under the heads of men, who were tired, and those orders acquired the smell of sweat and hay and the roundness of being used. Septons shouted and were asked to sit down for once and had to decide whether to obey their own sermons. A lord in the Reach ordered a chain across a spring, and a woman in his hall cut it while he watched, and the hall did not fall into chaos, and he learned a thing about the difference between honor and furniture. A tanner in the Crownlands told the king's men that there were no sons in his home to levy and stood aside to show them only girls. And the men went away because they were tired, and the girls laughed and then did not laugh because it is frightening to be almost something else. Word spread north in a way that words do not often do when they are not attached to a war. The North did what it always did. Considered, watched its own, weighed its grain, remembered winter, and decided to say the charter's phrases with a northern burr and see whether they bent in the cold. The Riverlands took to it quickly because rivers love refusals. They have been refusing banks since the first drop found a slope. The Stormlands muttered and raged and then set a chain across a well and then took it down again and pretended they had never said it. The Vale remained what it was. Beautiful, distant, hard to reach, hard to change. Save for little villages where widows taught boys with sticks to say sentences without spitting and made them like themselves for learning. Old Town changed, not all at once. A week without tithes made its septs discover their stores. They had never counted that way. Counting, it turned out, could be prayer. A month without enforced levies for men who held houses together while their wives bled children made a street quieter in the evening, and men wondered at their empty hands and then filled them with work. Not all men like to be idle. There is vanity in pretending you do. The starry September opened its side door each dawn with a bowl of porridge that belonged to nobody and everybody, and a line of people took it and waited no longer than it took to glance at the dawn's color. The woman with the ledger wrote 8 dozen bowls 2 mornings in a row, and then set the quill down and asked a boy whether he wanted to learn his letters. He did. He had decided to learn them the day Arthur had said, "Please," to men with a chain. He did not know that. He thought he liked the shape of ink. The faith did not like the change. Institutions stiffen under stress. They do not always break. Sometimes they remold. An old woman no one had thought to listen to in years stood in a minor sept and began to speak, and no one told her to sit. A young man with zeal burning through his shirt tried to start a march with blades and found his companions wanted to say simple things on steps and not to cut throats in alleys. He sent a letter that began, "I am ashamed," and then tore that page and began again, because he was not yet that brave. And in the second letter told Arthur that a certain goldsmith in Lannisport kept the faith's coin for love of money, not God, and that a stevedore would turn out his store if a cord were cut under the right beam. That letter saved 6 men from prison and made a steward poor and stole no one's bread. A season went by. The charter did not make a state. It made a habit. That was harder to kill. Men who had wanted to make a state and wear a new crown left them contemptuously and went to find some other banner to sew their medallions to. Women stayed. Children grew into the sentences as easily as they grew into shoes. People learned to greet one another with, "Have you eaten?" in a way that was not pity. There was a wedding in the free hall. There were 3 quiet funerals, one for Ser Denwell where Nairai put her or on the bench and told the story of how he had once, without being asked, put his hand on a boy's shoulder at the right moment and made him find his heel. The trap they had waited for still came. It had waited itself, learned their shape, idolized their weakest moment. It came on a day when the free hall's door was open, when Oberyn had set his spear aside in a corner because it needed new wrapping and his hands wanted to knot cord and not open flesh, when Arthur had a boy's small hand in both of his and was showing him where to carry his weight, when a voice shouted in the square and a man's law was read. By command of the king, The Prince Oberyn Martell was to present himself in King's Landing within a fortnight to answer a charge of seditious incitement and unlicensed exactions upon the Holy Faith and certain minor rent farmers, and failing that, 2 children of the Water Gardens would be taken into the king's care for their education and kept until such time as his person could be found. The sentence never finished being spoken. The heir took it and burned it and threw it back. The man who read it did not know that any part of his body had been brave until his legs stood still under him. He had thought to be carried by the writ's momentum into the next minute. He found himself alone with all his parts. There are choices you imagine making, and there are those which come like a hand and turn your head without asking. If they had gone to King's Landing, they would have fed the story. If they had ignored the writ, they would have written a new story, that their anger could be uncoupled from their love, and that would have become a chain in its turn. Arthur spoke first to Oberyn without moving his mouth. "We will not go. We will go to Dorne first." Oberyn's jaw went tight enough to make a stone crack. He made it looser. He spoke not to the crier, but to the crowd. "If the king wishes to take children to teach them to be hungry and holy in a way that makes their bellies shrink, he will find the road goes through us. You will say our words while we go. You will not stop. I will go to Sunspear. Arthur will go Somme. You or else. We will not be at the same place. They do not get to put a hand on both of our throats at once. If they reach the fertile, they will find their feet in sand and their mouths dry and their courage different than it is in their cool halls." They went. The march to Dorne was not heroic. It was necessary. Areo set a pace that made men's hearts adjust. Nyrai took boats as far as water would carry and then walked and loved the walking as long as there were people to put words into, as if they were empty bowls. They sent riders ahead with quiet marks for Doran to see who could read the spaces behind things. When they reached the Boneway's last cut and looked down toward the heat that was home, they found not soldiers blocking the pass but women sitting on stones with baskets in their laps, their mouths set to the work of eating and talking. A Lannister party had gone as far as the Will Lands and then turned back because their mules had gone lame from unfamiliar rocks, and the men had learned the old southern habit of being polite in dangerous ways, and it had unsettled them more than swords would have done. Doran met them in a little court behind a wall that had heard everything and remembered only what mattered. He made no speeches. He put his hand on Oberyn's face and left it there as if it could warm or frighten sense into him, and then took it away and nodded at Arthur because he had been a boy once with a book about the Sword of the Morning under his pillow, and age does not take such things entirely. "They will not get their hands on our children," he said simply. "We will take the heat of this and send it back cooled. You will not go to King's Landing. You will go to Old Town. The work is there. If they want you, they must come far from their gate with their lies and their lances and their loud hands. And when they arrive, the people who cut chain for water will be there to watch. They dislike being watched in the doing." "You will take heat onto yourself," Arthur said. Doran looked at him, and the look contained years of being a prince who did not move because moving would satisfy men who wanted him to be angry and lose the room. "It is my use," he said. "You may have yours." They returned to Old Town as if no writ had been read. The hand sent a letter with 5 words. "The king has drunk deeply." It was not an excuse. It was a sentence that carried years of grief in it. A way for a man to tell another man that his power had limits that were both shame and mercy. It came with riders bearing more orders. Those riders did not read the writs in the squares. They handed them to women with ledgers and boys with quick eyes and went on. The end did not arrive as a clash of armies. The end came as a series of days that wore the same face until someone realized the world had changed its clothes. In Old Town's open market, a woman told a priest to give back the coin she had just placed in his dish, and he did. In a village on the Mander, men refused to throw wheat through a hoop as a game before being allowed to bake it, and the Lord found that he laughed with them because the hoop looked silly leaning in a corner and went away. In King's Landing, a group of women walked slowly to the Red Keep's gate with loaves on their heads and cords around their waists, and the gold cloaks were instructed to knock them down, and did not because Barristan had told them a story about his mother, and in it there were loaves and cords and a gate, and it ended with him ashamed of himself at 15. In the Reach, a boy sang too loudly about chains and was given a cup of water and told by his father to sing quieter, and he did. In the Vale, a trestle table was set outside a sept, and on it a piece of paper with 4 lines, and anyone who wanted to sign put a mark. It said, in a bad hand, no tithes when hungry, no beating for talking, no taking of the keeper, no chain across spring. They called it not a charter. They did not love that word, but simply the 4. They taught their children to say them with their bread thanks at supper. The crown did not die. It did something harder. Continued. It found itself like a man in a room where all the chairs had been moved one pace and could not quite sit the old way. It was not dethroned. It was made ordinary. The king, who loved to be loved, learned to accept a cheer that sounded like, "Thank you for not spoiling our work," and counted it as glory. The hand learned to sleep sometimes, and his sleep was not the nightmare of a man who has betrayed his covenant with order, but the heavy fatigue of someone who has placed his small weight on the correct side. The High Septon did not lose his hat. He lost his fear. That was a greater loss. He went to the market some mornings and walked home without trying to bless anyone, and those who saw it felt a piece of iron leave their shoulders, as if a priest's eyes had been a yoke. Lannisport sent no more writs. Casterly Rock sent stewards with polite hands and men who asked questions and, in the asking, learned answers they would never have believed from any man in a velvet coat. A small boy in a golden surcoat tripped on a charter's cord in a village, and a woman caught him and laughed, and then bit her mouth bloody because she had laughed at a lion's child. The boy laughed back, which saved 3 lives that day in some other place because his laughter changed what a man thought he had to bring to a dinner with a steward. Such things move through the world like wind. When at last Arthur drew the sword in daylight before a crowd, it was not to fight. They gathered at the starry September because the doors were to be opened for a feast not paid for by the poor. The careful man had arranged it, and the woman with the ledger had set knives in places on tables where no one would see that they were not for cutting bread but for cutting arguments into manageable pieces. Arthur unwrapped on and held it up so those in the back could see, because sometimes you must give men a picture to take home to their wives so that wives who distrust ideas will forgive them for bringing one to supper. This, he said, has killed men who deserved not to die and a few who did. It has kept an oath that made the world smaller and now keeps an oath that makes it larger. Watch. He lowered the blade to a shield that had been brought, bearing the sigil of a minor house that had put a chain across a spring and learned. He set the edge against the painted chain and with the gentlest pressure imaginable slid it. The paint flaked away in a perfect bright line. The metal underneath was unmarked. The crowd laughed as if relieved of a burden. The picture was enough. No iron beneath the painted chain had been harmed in the making of this new thing. They clapped first with politeness and then with something else, something that had been stalled under their ribs and then moved. After the feast, bread, yes, and meat, yes, and green things with oil on them, and children running through the legs of men they had not feared for a whole afternoon. Arthur walked to the river with Nairai. They stood where the willows made a green room, and he unwrapped the sword again and held it and said, "I could keep it. I could carry it and use it as a promise I do not entirely believe. Or I could put it where it belongs and be a man with 2 hands and a job and let the sword be what it is, a good tool for a doer of a particular task. That task is not mine any longer." "Where?" Nairai asked. "Starfall," he said. "I will take it home and say to the stone there, 'Look, I kept my oath, better late than never.' Then I will leave it and not look back." He smiled, small and real. "I will teach. That is what is left." "You were always teaching," Nairai said. "You just thought you were killing." She put her hand on his forearm and squeezed once, and then was embarrassed by her own mercy and tried to hide it by scowling at a willow. He let her have her dignity. Oberyn did not go to Starfall. He went back to the water gardens with Ario at his side and the smell of fishercross in his clothes and a new kind of dust on his boots. Not road dust, but the powder that remains when law has been ground down and used to pave a better path. The children were older by an inch in all directions. He knelt to one boy who had not been born when Elia died and said, "Speak your lines." And the boy did, not like a priest and not like a parrot, but like a child saying the names of cousins. No tithes while hungry, no beating for speaking, no taking of the keeper, no chain across spring. He did not miss a word. Oberyn kissed the crown of his head because he had always been that sort of man and always would be. loving boys for their words and girls for their hands and men and women for the ways they failed and then stood again. He went to Doran. They sat and said nothing, and the sea made its wide sound. Doran poured wine, and neither of them made a face at the way it was not the right vintage for the moment. "You have burned with a steady flame," Doran said. "I did not believe you could. That is my failure, not yours." "I nearly turned to torch," Oberyn answered. "Arthur stopped me. So did Areo. So did an oar." He smiled. "Perhaps you should have sent me a boatwoman instead of letters when I was young." "She would have cut your hair first," Doran said, with the old tease in his voice, and they both laughed and then did not laugh, because laughter at two men's youth in a world where their sister had died feels like eating bread in a graveyard. It is allowed. It is uncomfortable. You do it anyway. There was no coronation for the charter. There was no day men later called a holiday. There was instead a rhythm that folded itself into lives. A girl in the Crownlands, old someday, told her grandchild that once men had come and put a chain on their spring and the charter had made them take it off, and the grandchild looked up at her with astonishment because the thought of a chain there sounded as strange as a horse in a kitchen. A priest in Old Town, very humble and therefore more dangerous than a prideful one, taught a class of boys their letters by way of the four and found that teaching had become prayer without him trying to make it so. The hand died years later, still tired and still brave in the smaller way that wears better, and men said kind words over him that were true enough to be allowed. The king died as kings in that red-blooded line tend to do. Hunting, drunk, loving the wrong thing with all his heart. The realm did not break when he fell. It sagged and then remade itself around what now held better. That was the point. Arthur took a small party to Starfall. He did not tell a story as he went. He did not grant himself the deceit of drama. He walked into the hall where his sister once smiled from a balcony, and where a boy named Oberyn had stood with dust on his feet and asked to touch the blade and been allowed because Arthur had been a generous man even then. He laid dawn on the table where a family had eaten for 7 centuries and said to the stone, "I have used this for what it should have been used for. I will not need it again." He put his hand on the hilt and let the last thread of that tie leave him. He did not feel emptied. He felt put in place, like a stone settled in a wall that would hold through any winter. A boy asked him before he left, "Boys are the same in any age. Are you the sword of the morning?" Arthur looked at him and smiled with the gravity that teaches boys how to receive a thing precious and not shinily beautiful. "No," he said, "I am a man of the afternoon." The boy blinked and wondered whether he had been insulted or blessed. Years later, he would tell his sons that one and watch them try to puzzle it and be satisfied when they did not. It would be theirs when they were ready. Fishercross prospered in its small way. Boats came and went. The free hall's cord stayed on the wall. Nyrise or acquired scars and the carved words smoothed under her hand. Joss became a man and did not lose the care with which he set his heel and taught others. He never forgot the day he leaned his weight on a ratchet and moved a door that had thought it would remain shut forever. The woman with the ledger took the book out and put it back and took it out and never allowed it to supplant her eyes. Areo sat, old, enormous, with scars that had become part of the geography of a village children would learn in their hands, and sometimes kept the peace by coughing. At the last, when Oberyn himself died, which he would do at an age that disappointed him because his appetites never dimmed, he did not die for a cause. He died because bodies end. He died with the smell of oranges in his hair and a piece of bread in his mouth and the sound of children arguing about fairness outside a window. He had made the world a little safer for such a death, and he knew it. Arthur stood in the doorway and did not cry because tears are for those who have kept something back. He had kept nothing back. He said, to the empty room and to his friend and to Elia and to everyone else who had been invited to this life without getting to choose. It turned. He meant the river. He meant the world. He meant a chain. The last sound is the one that began it and belonged to no one's property. A chain falling from a spring, a clean splash, water that does not know what you called it yesterday, passing, feeding, reflecting the light that touches it without asking who owns either. The charter did not praise that fire. It made food on it. That was all. That was enough.